Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole for June 28, 2022, and welcome also to the Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. Councillor Anderson in the chair. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda as we have presented? Councillor Finch, a seconder. Mayor Elliott, thank you. None opposed, motion carried. The first we have up is a staff report from Ms. Charlene Pawluk, our Legislative Services Manager, on the Council and Committee Member Code of Conduct Review and Bylaw Amendment. Ms. Pawluk, your floor is yours.
Good morning, Council. My name is Charlene Pawluk. I'm the Manager of Legislative Services, and I'm here today to present on the draft Code of Conduct bylaw and the draft amendment to the Council Remuneration and Expenses bylaw. So the purpose is to receive Council feedback on the draft bylaws. Following my brief presentation, I'm here to listen and take notes on proposed changes to the two bylaws. Okay, some background. So the current Council and Committee Member Code of Conduct policy was approved by Council in 2016, and there have been no amendments since. In reviewing the current policy, it was noted to be quite general in nature, that a bylaw allows more certainty and is more enforceable, and to the benefits of improving the Code of Conduct to add specificity, to expand on processes and procedures with respect to the informal and formal dispute resolution and reporting out procedures. The procedure bylaw amendment was given first 3 readings recently, and the amendment includes language with respect to conduct at meetings. And that bylaw will be going to Council on July 5th for adoption. So I'll just do a brief overview of the Code of Conduct bylaw. So Part 2 speaks to standards and values, and that's similar to the current policy. Part 3, conduct of elected officials. There's a few additions included in the bylaw, including public meeting conduct and campaign activities. Part 4 speaks to its addition to the policy, the complaint and resolution procedures, and then Part 5, appointment of an independent investigator. So the draft bylaw includes that confidential requests may be submitted to the CAO without the requirement to file a complaint. So if a member is not certain, they can speak to the CAO first and then proceed with a formal complaint if they wish. And there are procedures for informal resolution and for formal resolution. Wording includes that the investigator will give strong preference to the informal resolution wherever possible. And then just a quick overview of the Council Remuneration and Expenses bylaw amendment. So this draft bylaw aligns with the Code of Conduct bylaw, includes reduced remuneration in the event that a council member contravenes the Code of Conduct. Reduction in salary starts at 10% over a 12-month period for a first-time breach and increases to 15 for a second breach and 25 for a third. Communication. So once adopted, both bylaws will be uploaded to the district website and staff will be available to answer questions. Local government election candidates will be provided with both the Code of Conduct bylaw and the Consolidated Council Remuneration and Expenses bylaw as part of the nomination package. As well, the bylaws will be included on the elections page on the district website. Then the Code of Conduct bylaw will be provided to committee members as the bylaw applies to council and committee members. So next steps, following feedback from council, staff will amend the draft bylaws if necessary, and bring forward the bylaws for consideration of first three readings. So will depend on the level of changes. If there's not a lot of changes, we can likely bring forward next week. If there's a lot of changes, it probably wouldn't be until July 19th. Staff will draft the oath of office pursuant to Provincial Order 326, which contains prescribed wording. So this order is dated June 13th, 2022. So this is quite new from the province. And a code of conduct policy or procedure may be required that outlines mediation steps and procedures, particularly if it falls outside the scope of the bylaw. Okay, and the staff recommendation is that council direct staff to bring the code of conduct bylaw and council remuneration and expenses bylaw amendment to a regular council meeting for consideration of first three readings, incorporating feedback received at the June 28th Committee of the Whole meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pawluk. Council, any questions or feedback at this time? Followed by Councillor Pettingill.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Pawluk, when we define committee member in the definitions, do we have to specifically mention the library board? Because they're somewhat of an independent board, although we do make the appointments. And I wasn't sure if it applied to them fully or not.
Through the chair, thanks for the question. I think it would be appropriate to add that in under committee member.
And then in section 3.11, where it talks about business relations and a council member who engages in another profession, business, or occupation concurrently while holding elective office. So we still have in there acting as an officer or director for a business that receives district funds, grants, or goods or services. Can that not be resolved by the member just recusing themselves in a meeting? I'm still confused about whether that's a conflict of interest issue or a code of conduct issue, because merely just serving as an officer or director doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. It's what you do with that position. So this section still isn't entirely clear to me.
Through the chair, I'm going to have to get some clarification on that. So I will look into it and amend the wording if necessary.
Yeah, I was sort of wondering, the following shall be a contravention of this section unless the member declares a conflict. Something like that. I just thought maybe to try and, yeah, just recognizing that we are in a small town and council members often are engaged in other things.
Can I just get some clarification so that's 3.11, point one.
Section A.
Okay, thank you.
Mostly I'm thinking of our nonprofit organizations. And I guess would like us to follow best practice here. So if our expectation is that people step down from board appointments or doing business with anybody that receives district funds, that can be quite a broad scope of businesses. So I just want to try and find that balance there. Chair, just one more question. We speak to people's behavior during the campaign, but that would apply to incumbents running. But can someone apply this retroactively to a new person running who runs a really challenging campaign, is elected? And I guess that's a question for me. Once they're elected, can it be applied to their campaign or no?
Through the chair. I would think no, but that is something that I would have to look into.
Councillor Penigo.
Yeah, the mayor's question about the library board raised some questions for me, and so I'll just preface them by saying I wouldn't want to delay this. So, maybe this is something to deal with in the next iteration, but it does strike me if this code of conduct should apply to anyone appointed by council. So, if we are only applying a couple seats to some external board, maybe the conduct expectations still hold for our appointees, or maybe it's sort of any committee or board. So there's the SSC, which isn't very active, and so on. So maybe there's things beyond the library board. Maybe it's our appointees to the housing society at least. And so I guess a bit of an open question for everyone there, how broad this should be. And I would lean towards having it apply in those cases to, expecting a high standard for people we appoint. On 1.4.2 and 1.4.1, actually, I think the numbering's wrong there. So just a typo, it should be 1.3.2 and so on. But also in there, the provisions of this bylaw are to be interpreted broadly in a manner that is consistent with the community charter. What does broadly mean as opposed to narrowly or not mentioning that? Sorry, that's 1.4.2 in the current numbering.
Through the chair, I take this to mean that it has to be consistent with the community charter. I can't speak to the wording with broadly. I can look into that.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious if that had, I am guessing it has some sort of legal significance or understanding, and I was just curious what that was. Maybe it's more sort of that has to apply to the intent, not just the letter of the charter, if that's what it's trying to say. So it was mostly a curiosity thing there. I wasn't clear if there's poor conduct, does the complainant have to be the actual recipient of whatever sort of misbehavior? Or, if you see a colleague being bullied, but they're not comfortable coming forward, can you act as the complainant?
Through the chair, I think that would be appropriate if someone else observed behavior, just to have a confidential conversation with the CAO as a starting point.
Okay, and as written, does the bylaw support that coming forward and sort of initiating the process and carrying it through? I just wasn't sure there. And maybe that's something just to look at and make sure it is there if it's not.
Through the chair. Yeah, I can look into that and ensure that the wording supports that.
Okay, thank you. So the 4.1.11, the remuneration to which that council member would otherwise be entitled shall be reduced. And I was wondering if the shall should be a may. I guess I had it in mind that there'd be recommendations and council would make the final determination. The way this is written, it seems that your remuneration it's just deducted full stop. And so I just wanted to clarify if remuneration is being handled differently than other sanctions, if that's our intent there.
Through the chair, can you just clarify what number that is?
I think it's 4.1.11.
Under remuneration 4.1.11A. Ms. Glenday.
Thank you, through the chair. My understanding of the intent of that is to remove the, once the investigation, it keeps it objective. Once the investigation determines that something has happened, this is the course of action, and it depoliticizes the conversation at council about whether or not a particular situation requires a reduction in remuneration. It makes it very black and white, is that if the investigation indicates that a breach has happened, this is the consequence, and it's not a subjective conversation at the council table. That's my understanding of it, the purpose of the word shall.
Okay, thank you. But then this, in terms of other sanctions, that is still up to council discretion. Is that the intent? Because my understanding is remuneration sanctions is just one possible type of sanction. So the others would be at council discretion.
Through the chair, yes, you're referring to removing someone from a committee, so to speak, or other sanctions, then yes, the answer is that's up to council.
Okay, I have a couple more, but I'll stand down.
Please go ahead, Mayor Elliott.
You have to read B with A. And so the investigator can make a recommendation to council that the members' remuneration not be reduced if the council member took all reasonable steps to prevent the breach and the breach was trivial or inadvertent, or the breach was because of an error in judgment made in good faith. So we do allow, I think, for some flexibility at the discretion of council, but the starting point is you breach the code of conduct, you lose your salary. And I think that's an important piece for this.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, thanks so much to staff for their work on this. I'm excited to see the code of conduct come forward and the revision of it in a bylaw format. A few questions of clarification on 3.6.2. Just scrolling back up to it myself. This is the use of social media, and it reads, members must regularly monitor their social media accounts and immediately take measures to deal with the publication of messages or postings by others that violate the provisions of this bylaw. And when I first read that, I thought it was quite broad, and I'm curious if you have a sense as to whether that means, and my sense was that I would like to actually add that any publications of messages or postings like on the member's own social media pages would be monitored by that person, as opposed to that member being expected to monitor all social media platforms like Squamish Speaks, for example. So I'm just wondering if there's some clarification that's needed in 3.6.2.
Their social media.
But it says, and then immediately take measures to deal with the publication of messages or posting by others.
Oh, on their account.
I think we need to read
Iterate
on their accounts. Yeah, and I'm happy to hear council feedback on that. When I first read it, I took it as like, because I have a social media account on Facebook, that means that I'm responsible for monitoring comments on all the social media platforms, and that was scary to me. Not something that I want to start doing. The other one that caught my eye was 3.11 as well, that the mayor was speaking to. And I think just being cognizant, and I think 3.11A is one area, but I actually think most of those subsections could potentially be dealt with through conflict of interest as opposed to through code of conduct. So I think there's some cognizant word choices in the preamble there. And then my other comment, I guess, question is on part 4 and the complaint and resolution process. And when I was reading what we currently have in our code of conduct policy, there's a section in it that I think is really important, and it speaks to how the council and the committee member code of conduct is a set of guidelines that express collective standards, but it's really up to the members themselves who have the primary responsibility to ensure those standards of the conduct are understood and met. And the steps to be followed in the event of a conflict of a breach policy. In our current code of conduct, the first step is to attempt to manage the conflict between the parties. And that's one thing that I think is currently missing in our complaint and resolution procedure, is the responsibility of the individuals who this bylaw applies to actually adhere to that standard. And so I wonder if it'd be useful to add some language under part 4 before 4.1 that reflects our current code of conduct policy a little bit more. And that was a bit rambly, but I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
Through the chair, did you have some suggested wording?
Yeah, I think, let me just pull up the current code of conduct. So in the procedures section of the current code of conduct policy, I think the first paragraph, as well as the fourth paragraph down says the steps to be followed in the event of a conflict or breach of policy. Step 1 is to attempt to manage the conflict between the parties involved. And then 2 is to bring to the attention of the chair. And so I think that what we currently have in the bylaw is a new process starting at step 2. I think we've removed step 1, which is the responsibility of the parties to at least try and manage the conflict on their own. So I think pulling that language would be helpful to me.
Through the chair. Yeah, that does make sense to me, that that could be added. I'm not sure what other council members feel about that.
Councillor Stoner, just for our recording secretary also, what was the passage you were citing from the current policy again?
Yeah, so my suggestion would be to pull in some, probably not like verbatim because there needs to be a little bit of nuancing, but so in the current code of conduct policy on page 12 of our package at the bottom under procedures, it says implementation and enforcement. And the first paragraph of that reads, the council and committee member code of conduct is a set of guidelines that express collective standards of conduct expected for members of the district of council and committees. Members themselves have the primary responsibility to ensure these standards of conduct are understood and met, and that the public can continue to have full confidence in the integrity of the government in the district of Squamish. And then further down in that section that says steps to be followed in the event of a conflict or breach of policy. First step is to attempt to manage the conflict between the parties involved.
Thank you.
Just to add, in support of that, for council's benefit, we'll be speaking about the respectful workplace policy next, and that is also the first step in a complaint process with that, so it does align.
Very good. Mayor Elliott, on this point?
I just want to make sure that whatever wording we add doesn't include the word guidelines, because these are more than guidelines, this is a bylaw. So I think just adding that attempt to manage the conflict between the parties is critical. And I think the preamble to our new bylaw captures a lot of that spirit, but I think it's an important step to being successful. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Finch.
Thank you, Chair. So there's very little in the staff materials regarding costs, and I understand why that is, with this being new territory for the district. I would like to know, though, has any work been done to determine any idea of potential costs? And an immediate question that comes to my mind is, how much do code of conduct investigators charge? Do they do so hourly, daily, weekly?
Through the chair, staff have kind of estimated what costs may be, and have worked with the financial services department, and the plan is to have a contingency in the budget, which would be funded through reserve if funds are required.
Okay, I'm still a little nervous about costs, but I don't think that nervousness should hold anything up in this process. And Chair, I also wanted to ask if we received the complaint the day after this bylaw was adopted, does staff have confidence in there's a go-to investigator or a firm standing by to take the matter on?
Through the chair, the short answer is yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Further questions, Council? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I think last time I asked about, speaking of the investigator, if we wanted to have them require a member of some subset of professional bodies or a professional body or association, like being a member of the bar or anything. And I just, I didn't see that added. And so I'm just interested to hear thoughts on why we wouldn't want that requirement.
Mayor Elliott.
I think it starts to get through the chair too specific. In most cases, our staff are going to hire a certified mediator or a lawyer, depending on whether it's informal or formal. And so I don't think our staff have ever but maybe Ms. Glenday can speak to this. When we work with our respectful workplace policy, we have an outline there that they need to have a certain designation. But the people that we hire to help us with that are absolutely professionals. You wouldn't want to undercut your bylaw by having someone who's not fully qualified to do the work. So I think it's assumed, but so in my mind, it didn't need to be added.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. I just wanted to sort of clarify. And then just getting back to the social media thing, I just had an idea for some wording, which maybe it's not the perfect wording, but maybe gets at what I think the point is, and it's members must regularly monitor social media content where they hold primary moderation control and immediately take measures to deal with yada, yada, yada. And the thought there is, on Facebook, for example, if it's your own page or your own group, then you are responsible. But if you're part of a thread and you're making posts on someone else's page, you have some ability, I think, to delete comments under your comment, but you're not the primary moderator there. And I was trying to stay away from language around posts or pages and all of that, because it means different things all over the place. So I was trying to get at that distinction, which I think is what Councillor Stoner is trying to get at. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Further thoughts on this topic, Council? I'll just offer for myself that I'm in support of the present wording of 3.6.2 regarding regular monitoring of our own social media accounts. And this is based on my experience with another organization I'm currently with managing their social media policy. And I think it is a reasonable expectation, and one that anyone would have the tools to appropriately address. Councillor Herford.
I actually like the suggested wording where where they have primary moderation control, because to me, the original wording, members must regularly monitor their social media accounts, doesn't clearly define what is their account. It could be it could be the account that has the council member's name directly attached to it, but it could also be something that's more that's not as immediately obvious. But I think that the responsibility is the same in both of those, under both of those situations. So how you decide if it's yours is if you have primary moderation control, or some other wording that captures that. If you see what I mean, it could be an anonymous attack group, but if you have the moderation control, hey, look, that's yours, not just because it has your name on it. So I don't know where everyone else falls on that, but I like the expansion of this anyways, or the more specific way. Whether this is the exact appropriate wording, I'm not entirely sure, but I like sort of framing that. So if you have a group and things are happening in that group, even if it's not named after you, then you have some responsibility in that space.
If I understand you, Councillor Herford, you're looking for greater clarity or potentially better clarity on social media accounts, the definition there. Thank you.
Through the chair, but you're saying the wording would be added in addition to the wording their social media accounts and any other accounts where they have primary moderation. So it's both and. I can support that.
Further feedback, Council? I wonder if I could ask, just for my own benefit and perhaps for the recording secretary, I'm not sure. I wasn't quite clear, Mayor Elliott, on the first point you raised and that we discussed regarding library board and which section in particular you were referring to. I wasn't sure I noted that down correctly.
In the definition section?
Definitions section. Very good. That's what I thought. Thank you. And I also note that we had a typo, and I'm sure that Ms. Pawluk has seen that in section 1.3, purpose and interpretation, just in the numbering there. Any final comments or questions, feedback, Council? Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I just wanted to circle back to that the business relation piece and just where did we land there? Is that business relations section, the whole thing just better served under conflict of interest, or is it to be edited here? I missed where we landed.
Through the chair, I think it was under general conduct, section 3.1.1. There was a question whether this could be better served under conflict of interest, and I was going to look into this wording in this section.
Mayor Elliott.
No, I think that Councillor Herford, through the chair, is referring to 3.11. 3.11. The business relations section is the place where several of us were wondering if this is the place that should add the wording, unless a conflict of interest is declared, then this applies. And I think we've left it for staff to look into. Can I move the staff recommendation?
Very good. Please go ahead. Seconded by Councillor French. Final comments, Mayor Elliott?
So I think this work is so important and I think sets up the next council very well. Our province has been reluctant, despite other provincial bodies doing this, to put in a mandatory code of conduct piece of legislation. And so it really leaves it up to councils to strengthen their code of conduct. For me, to me, this is about creating a space where people who aren't normally represented in government feel like they can have a spot at the table and know that they can take up that spot and their colleagues will respect them and that the dialogue, while potentially passionate at times, doesn't have to cross that line into personal attack, derogatory statements, and that for me, code of conduct reaches far beyond just when we're sitting at this table. And so connecting this to social media, connecting this to the campaign trail, connecting this to work on committees is so important because I think when the public looks to its elected officials, it wants to see their behavior reaching a high bar, no matter where they are, what they're doing. The strongest piece of this is connecting it to the remuneration bylaw and some listed possible sanctions so that everyone that is stepping forward to run understands why this is so important and takes it seriously. And I look forward to seeing the new oath of office as that comes forward as well, so that that piece is connected into this as well. So I'm very supportive and thankful for the work that staff have done to make this a really robust, fair bylaw. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Finch.
Thanks, Chair. And also speaking in favor of the motion, it's fitting that this council is working on this bylaw at this time. As a group, we've worked cooperatively and cohesively since day one. The same certainly can't be said about councils of the past. A council that struggles with conduct issues might not necessarily be expected to bring forward a bylaw like this. The first step in solving a problem is to recognize there is a problem, and I've definitely observed councils in the past where they were so caught up in their own differences that they were just blind to how those differences were holding them back as a group and holding back the potential of our community. So I expect that future councils will be grateful to have this bylaw in place if one or more future council members are acting disrespectfully while occupying these seats. The bylaw creates a tool that I wish past councils had as a resource to deal with the small number of people who have been disruptive in the past. So I support moving this bylaw to first reading with the feedback that we've heard today and incorporating that into our next look at the bylaw. Thanks.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to thank staff for their work on this. I agree that this work is very important, especially moving forward. We did have a code of conduct policy previously, and I think moving this into a bylaw and tying it to our remuneration and expenses bylaw is really critical just to provide the strength behind it. As a policy, it was helpful to be able to sign that when we took our oath for this council. And I think it served us well. But I think if there are really significant challenges at the council table or outside with conduct, then not having or having a bylaw and having it tied to remuneration and expenses really strengthens it and makes it clear for everybody what the expectations are. To me, this is really important work, but it's really hopefully something that won't ever be used. I think we put it in place so that we start to build the foundation for safe working spaces and for having more voices at the table. And we know it's there in our back pocket if we need it, but hopefully we don't need to use it because we are already starting at a more equal and level playing field with this as the foundation. So that's why I think it's important to move this work forward. I am thankful for staff for putting the work in and for my colleagues for entertaining moving this forward. I do think it'll put us in a leadership position across the province for the strength of the bylaw that we're creating today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Next up, and to an item already referred to, an updated respectful workplace policy and procedures, which will complete the picture. And I take it we may be joined by Ms. Julie Wengi, Director of Human Resources. Very good. Welcome, Ms. Wengi. Floor is yours.
Thank you. So my name is Julie Wengi. I'm the Director of Human Resources for the district, and I'm here to present the amendments to the Respectful Workplace Policy for your consideration. Okay, so just a bit of background in relation to the Respectful Workplace Policy. So obviously every person has the responsibility to contribute to a positive work environment and the right to work in an environment free of bullying, harassment and discrimination as well. So there are a number of legislative requirements in relation to this. So WorkSafe BC has their bullying harassment legislation. It's also contained in district policies and council code of conduct bylaw as well. So in 2008, the district first created and adopted their Respectful Workplace Policy. And then the policy was last amended in 2016 to include members of council within application of the policy as well. It forms part of the employee handbook, and it's also a policy acknowledgement form that's signed off when people commence employment as well. So, so here to talk about just the amendments to the policy. So a little bit has changed since 2016. And so what we did was we went through, we reviewed it and updated it to make sure it was still current, for example, with the Human Rights Code, and also to introduce some more language in relation to equity inclusion. And then I'll go through one of those aspects in a minute. So the revised purpose includes reference to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I said. The updates to the policy include reference to online and social media platforms as well. And then the policy applying to all aspects of employment and operations of the district, including all aspects of recruitment, selection, and the conditions of employment. We included, in consultation with the IDEA Committee, we included microaggression in relation to discrimination, and also provided some additional examples under sexual harassment as well. Since 2016, there's been updates to the Human Rights Code of BC language regarding the prohibited grounds, so we've updated that as well. We updated the responsibilities to include reference to the human resources responsibilities and investigator training and appointment as well. So that is both the internal investigators and external investigators. We updated the reporting procedures specific to complaints filed against by or against the CAO. And also where in relation to complaints filed by or against members of council, where it's deemed to meet the definition of bullying harassment under the Workers' Compensation Act as well. And I think this has references, and in the policy has reference to the interrelation with the council code of conduct policy as well, and where they fit. In relation to breaches under this policy, breaches, for example, by members of council, when they're deemed to be occurred, will be managed as per the council code of conduct. We have updated our internal resolution process to include a mediation option as well. We've included the 12-month time limit. So this is the standard time limit for filing a complaint under the Human Rights Code, and reference to what unsubstantiated complaint outcomes look like as well. And then what we have also included is reference to interim investigations reports due to the inability to interview the respondents. So say, for example, when someone is on leave and we have interviewed all the complainants and the witnesses, but there may be a period of time in which we can, before we can interview the respondent as well. So that's the issuing of an interim report. And that is, yes.
Thank you. Council, questions, feedback? Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, under the formal complaint process procedures, section 1.2C, it says an individual making a formal complaint of discrimination or bullying and harassment can present the complaint to their director, manager, or supervisor. And then we have a workaround in the case of a formal complaint made by the CAO. But I'm curious, what happens if the complaint is within HR? So is there a workaround?
That's an excellent question.
All right. So my suggestion is that we include a workaround for HR. And then my other question was just around general reporting procedure for this type of thing. And so is it normal, or is it something that we would consider getting like an annual report of the high level number of complaints that were filed a year? I don't really know if that's a reasonable thing to ask for, but I'm just curious if there's validity in trying to get a sense of like, are the number of these complaints increasing across the district, or are they decreasing over time? Or how do we get a sense from reporting from staff how, again, I feel like these sorts of policies are kind of last resorts. So they're not something that we necessarily want to be dependent on, but how do we get a sense of where the district is at with respect to creating an inclusive culture for our employees?
Ms. Glendale.
Thank you, Chair. That's a big question. So on one hand, you're asking about numbers of complaints tied to how inclusive is our culture. And I wouldn't want to rely, and I think that's the point that Councillor Stoner is making, is relying on this as a measure of our inclusive culture. I can tell you as the CAO at an operational level, I'm very aware of how many of these complaints occur and if there are trends and if there is something else behind it in terms of management performance that needs to occur. I think that using it as a measure of inclusivity, it's something to keep in mind, but it's a bigger, much bigger, what's the word I'm thinking of? There's many more ways. We're currently working on an intentional culture and core values renewal, which is talking about inclusion. So it's top of mind. How we measure that has yet to be defined. And certainly this could be an indicator, but I wouldn't want to rely on it solely. Thank you. Good question. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and I agree. It's not something that we actually want to rely on. It's just interesting to think about and similarly with the code of conduct, like having some sort of understanding of how frequently this is being used more as of like a flag, I think, like worst case scenario, but yeah, so it was just something that came to mind. Don't need to necessarily include it. Thank you.
Other questions, comments, council? Elliott, followed by Councillor Pettingill.
I know that we included microaggression under the definition of bullying and harassment. And I wondered if there was any discussion around, did it need its own section and examples versus, I guess psychologically in my head, I understand what bullying and harassment looks like. And so it kind of has a definition in my head. And microaggression is still a form of bullying and harassment, but it's, of course, on a micro scale, but it's very distinct. And I wondered, should they be in the same section in this, or should they be separated out so that we're actually helping people understand the difference? They're both harmful. And I don't know if that was considered or why they're together.
Sorry, through the chair. Yes, actually, it did move around in this document. Originally, it was under discrimination. We put it under bullying and harassment, in particular in relation to the way that it plays out in relation to tenure and seniority in unionized workplaces, for example. That being said, the work that we're doing with the IDEA committee, I think will more further extrapolate this out, and we do need to do some more work around microaggressions in that sort of context as well. It's why we settled on under bullying harassment. It could have its own section, but because the idea was this was a bullying, harassment and discrimination policy, it needed to fit somewhere in there. But yeah.
I was just considering Councillor Stoner's comment. I still think it's important for council to know how often this is being used. And so I do think there needs to be a reporting out mechanism, at least to council, about number of informal, number of formal ones resolved. Because I think it can be an opportunity for council to exercise its oversight role around what is our culture and why did the complaints go up, and similarly when we see something like RCMP reports, we can see where we have the same offender who's out of jail, considering, creating many of the issues. And it'd be important to know whether this is happening broadly across the organization or it's happening in a certain area and there's remediation efforts taking place to address it. So I do think, of course, not the details, but the numbers and whether and how they were resolved, I think is important. My other question is that other organizations also have whistleblower policies, and how are those distinguished from these kinds of policies? When would you want to put in place a whistleblower policy? Maybe we have one. I don't know.
Okay. So in my experience, the whistleblower policies are primarily is a secondary process, in particular for people who want to make complaints that are anonymous. So through the bullying, harassment, through the respectful workplace process, it is a named complainant, a named respondent. So the majority of organisations I've seen that have put those in place is for when that you may have people who do not wish to be known or do not wish to come forward. And the complaints they don't necessarily fall just inside discrimination, bullying, harassment, may also be inside financial accountability and that sort of stuff as well. So yes, I think there's always room in an organisation for a separate process for that as well.
Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, it sounds like just being prudent, a whistleblower policy is something to put on the work list at some point in some budget. But I just want to, I guess, test my understanding or perception, which is that this policy is not aimed primarily at expanding behavior expectations beyond WorkSafe and Human Rights Code and precedents in law. This is to clarify, what those expectations, those existing expectations are, and how we will handle things, and so on. Is that a correct understanding?
Sort of, I think. So yes, absolutely. It meets our expectations and requirements under the law, but we also do, so microaggressions isn't something that is, I mean, it is understood and being generally more understood, but it's not necessarily something that is codified in any way. So this does go, so when we talk about the discrimination and basically the respect that we require, that's our policies for how we treat each other in the working environment as well. So this policy meets all of the requirements under law, so under the Human Rights Code, under WorkSafe PC, and also sets in place what our expectations are for people working together in this environment too.
Further feedback, questions, Council? Mayor Elliott?
I've only heard a few adjustments, so I'm wondering, a question to our staff. Given what you've heard today, can we approve this policy with incorporating the feedback heard at committee of the whole? Or would you like to bring it back to make sure that our feedback's been incorporated in the way that we imagined it?
Can I speak to Ms. Wengi just for a moment? Thanks. Yes, staff are comfortable with that motion if it was put forward.
That is Ms. Glenday to return. Please.
Thanks for the clarity. No, staff are comfortable incorporating the feedback received today if council wants to approve, including that feedback.
Very good. And in summary, we've had the initial comments from Councillor Stoner regarding a workaround for human resources. We've discussed a reporting out mechanism for the benefit of building our culture, if you like. And we have discussed whether whistleblower policy would be a separate project. That is staff's preference. Were there further points we should note?
Thank you. I appreciated the examples throughout, but I just, in other things I've read where there's examples, there's usually something that just says, but not limited to. And without getting into, I'm sure we could all sit around and add more and more and more examples to these, unfortunately, through stories we've heard, but perhaps in the places that where it says example, just that little note could be applied. I think there's 3 spots, but they're easy enough to see. So thank you.
Then do we have a mover for the staff recommendation? Councillor Herford, a seconder? Councillor Stoner, comments? Councillor Stoner.
Just want to thank staff for their work on this and for bringing our respectful workplace policy up to date with required laws, and also putting us a little bit further ahead and making sure that we have clarity across our organization on what our expectations are for staff, so that like previously, the code of conduct, this makes sure that we have a respectful place for everybody to work. And I think that that is critically important. So thanks for your work.
Other comments, Council? For myself, as has been indicated in the discussion, we are building and reinforcing a culture here at Municipal Hall. And these two policies that we've discussed this morning are just two elements of it. We have others. One that was referred to by staff was the IDEA committee, but there's all kinds of initiatives and programs that we have targeting towards this goal of building and reinforcing our culture. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion passed. Thank you. Council, we have a timed item at 1 p.m., a delegation from Sea to Sky Community Services, and I don't see that we can adjust our agenda to fill in an hour and a half in between, and that makes up for the short lunch I gave everybody 2 weeks ago. So may I suggest we reconvene then at 1 o'clock sharp for the presentation by Sea to Sky Community Services on the Foundry program. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Committee of the Whole meeting. We are joined this afternoon by special guest, Ms. Krista Germyn from the Youth Services at Sea to Sky Community Services Society and manager of the local Foundry program for an update on the Youth Services programming and the Foundry. An update. Please join us.
Coordination required. Okay. Yeah, thank you for having me here today. For those of you I haven't met, as mentioned, my name is Krista Germyn. I'm the Youth Services Manager for Sea to Sky Community Services. In my role, I'm responsible for the oversight of our existing youth programs at Sea to Sky, which includes the ongoing delivery of Squamish youth services in the community, and as mentioned, to the development of Foundry Sea to Sky. I'm really grateful to be here sharing with you about the past couple of years. I don't need to tell the folks around this table that it's been a very interesting 2.5 years, which has impacted Sea to Sky as a whole and also youth services development in a lot of interesting ways, but also some positive ones as well. But I'm just really proud of our organization overall through all of these changes, which I'll talk a little bit about. Over the last few years, there's been a variety of influential factors, obviously, on the delivery of youth services. Firstly, the development of the Squamish Youth Strategy. So SSCS was heavily involved in the development of the youth strategy, promoting its development, connecting with young people over opportunities related to engagement, hosting world cafes and various other aspects. So it's really something that we're invested in as kind of guiding our youth services for Sea to Sky Community Services. Obviously, the earlier than expected closure of the Squamish Youth Resource Center was pretty impactful in terms of service delivery, coupled with the onset, obviously, of COVID and the pandemic. Interestingly, on the day that we had our end of youth center party planned, that was the day that the pandemic restrictions hit. So we were frantically calling people in the morning, oh, who's going to be attending? How many folks are going to be here? How are we serving our food? And all of those various aspects. So it was a little bit of a anticlimactic closure to the center, but we still managed to have a little bit of a celebration at the end. And that was Friday the 13th, actually, of March 2020. So kind of a fun fact there. But despite all this, it's really important to note that in 2021, just over 16% of the entire Sea to Sky corridor had accessed SSCS programs. So that's over our whole organization, and that's 6,500 residents out of 40,000, which was an 8% increase over the previous year. So letting us know that in the face of restrictions, our services there's still quite a need for our services as an organization. So let me just jump into a little bit of youth services highlights from 2020, starting there. As an organization, we've been positioning ourselves for this increased need of services. SSCS underwent significant restructuring in 2020, adding youth services as its own program stream within the organization, and subsequently hiring me as the first youth services manager for Sea to Sky. And this would allow us additional capacity to support the development, obviously, of Foundry Sea to Sky, but also a renewed focus on our existing youth programs, which is a really exciting time for us in our program development. The implementation, obviously, of the Squamish Youth Strategy was a highlight for us in 2020. But much like the Squamish Youth Council, for example, that kind of, we experienced some bumps along the road with regard to COVID. But, we'd been working really hard with our staff team on how to incorporate the mission, vision, and values of the Squamish Youth Strategy into our services. We had programs planned for the 55 and Brennan Park and other kind of community spaces, but COVID had other plans for us, which I'll speak to in a moment. But another kind of highlight from 2020 is obviously too the successful application that we had to Foundry BC, and becoming one of the lead agencies for the development of Foundry Sea to Sky. And so at the end of this year, there will be 19 Foundry centers open across the province. So we're part of that third phase of centers. So just to kind of note a little bit about the kind of pandemic and COVID programming for us within youth services. Quickly after the onset of COVID, obviously from our grand plans of various community programs, we had to pivot pretty quickly to develop virtual offerings for our programming. And only 1 month into the pandemic had already developed and delivered 7 different virtual opportunities, which was really exciting for us. So some examples here being Pictionary with 13 participants, virtual yoga with 5, Everybody Eats, which was a virtual dinner club kind of group activity, which had 8 participants. Our diversity club, working with LGBTQ and allied youth, had 6 participants, and a body break fitness program with 8 more. During this time of virtual offerings and being behind our screens, our youth services team also developed our youth services newsletter, reaching youth, families, and community about different programs that we offer. So, it was pretty exciting for us because in some ways, our youth services team was pretty well positioned to develop programming in this virtual space, given our clientele that we work with being a younger demographic and our youth services staff themselves being pretty tech savvy. They could really quickly pivot, which was so great for us because we were really proud to be able to offer these opportunities 1 month into the pandemic. So just to give you a snapshot of what some of this looked like, this is our virtual dinner club and our virtual art club, which was another example of programs. So for these 2 opportunities, we actually had staff delivering supplies to youth in the community so that they could participate in the virtual programming with us. When we were able to do a little bit more in-person opportunities and have some outdoor activities, we had disc golf was one of our first outdoor activities, which was pretty well attended and a fun time with our crew. And then another highlight from pandemic programming was our Self-Love Month that we coined. So all of our programs and activities that we did with youth in that month kind of followed that theme. And this is just a Zoom whiteboard screenshot of some of the themes and things that youth took away from those activities. So learning mindfulness techniques and learning about boundaries in social media, developing their own vision boards and things like that. So it was a really good time for our youth with those programs. So just down to talk a little bit about 2021 and kind of the highlights from that year. In 2021, when we were able to offer more in-person opportunities, it really allowed us a time to hone in on our program delivery model, which we were really excited to finally develop with all of the plans that we had in place in 2020 that didn't exactly go as planned. So obviously, since the closure of the youth center and the delivery of community-based programs, we were really able to hone those skills, like I was saying, balancing kind of our school-based activities with our one-to-one support of youth and registered programs and events, and developing different processes and strategies for how to do that as a staff team. We also organized our program development and delivery model to align with DOS programming to more effectively promote in the rec guide, for example, and also align with the school year. And then also too, another thing that we did within our program delivery model was identify key performance indicators for the year and organize them actually according to the Squamish Youth Strategy. So really, again, embedding that in our work. And also too, just a real increase in community partnerships and creative programming through the closure of the youth center and having to develop opportunities within the community and within different spaces. So through the spring and summer of 2021, we were able to offer more programming in person with the lessening of COVID restrictions, and just capitalized on outdoor opportunities where we could. So we did a lot of skiing activities, frisbee golf, mountain biking, paddle boarding, climbing, lots of different things, but also did still maintain a little bit of virtual programming where it was appropriate. Our Friday night games with friends virtual activity was really popular with kids, so we would just kind of share in some virtual games together on Fridays. But in terms of increased partnerships, the thing that makes a lot of our program delivery possible is strong partnerships with a lot of our community partners, just to increase our capacity and resources. So this includes obviously the District of Squamish for like skating events, for example, that we hosted, partnerships with Squamish Valley Recreation and the Squamish Nation, the Arts Council under one roof, Hoop Reel, Zero Ceiling, Rising Villages, and the RCMP are just some examples that I'll talk about a few of those in a little bit more detail in a second. But, you know, when reflecting on 2021, we talk about the summer really being the summer of fun for us. Like our staff had just a wonderful time with the youth outside doing just a lot of creative fun activities. So here's just some examples of them here. Like I had mentioned, the partnership with the Arts Council, you see the public art camp that we did. Which one was that? So we were working with the Arts Council, obviously, and a local artist to cover the shed outside of the Rope Runner. And I think we had 7 youth participate in that program. Wild Connections was a program offering outdoor activities to female and other underrepresented genders, participating in activities like paddleboarding, like you see, rafting, indoor climbing, and hiking up the gondola. And that program had 15 individual youth participate in that one. But one of the highlights that we were like really excited about from 2021 was our Portage Paddle program. So we partnered with local artist Appleton, Art Harry, and local woodcarver Lenny Rabinovich to teach 7 Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth the skills of carving. And so they produced their own paddles by the end of the summer. And subsequently, we invited these youth back in partnership with the Squamish Nation and RCMP Integrated First Nations Unit for a canoe pull on Alice Lake on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, which was pretty significant, not only because the youth got to put their own paddles that they carved in the water, and the significance of the day and being able to have an event with our partners for the day, but also because Little Thunderbird, the Voyager canoe, hadn't been in the water since the onset of COVID. So it was nice to work with our partners to do that. Yeah, so we have a pretty good time in youth services. Our staff work really, really hard in partnership with our community to do a lot of activities and a lot of meaningful programs with our kiddos in Squamish. So this is just a little bit in terms of annual impact and some year-over-year comparisons. So just kind of noting in 2017 to 2019, when we had full operations of the previous Youth Resource Center, it was heavily visited by youth. And those visits, obviously, as you can see, increased year over year, which was very telling for us in terms of the needs of youth in the community and the desire for that space. And then in 2020, obviously, the closure of the youth center and the pandemic impacted our programming and our ability to serve that high volume of youth visits. But we started to track our individual programs that we were offering, whether they be events or registered programs, out trips, things like that, and noted that we did 62 programs in that first year of the pandemic, so in 2020. And then we could see in 2021, obviously, our youth visits to our programs starting to increase. We're developing our capacity and our processes. We had more programs, and then started being more intentional about tracking the individual youth that we served. So in 2021, that was 210 youth in our Squamish Youth Services portfolio of programs. And just an interesting thing to note for 2022, this year, already at this point in the calendar year, we've worked with over 300 individual youth through our programs and services. Yeah, and so, you know, the numbers tell a story, but the other thing that I'm just noticing in our work every day is, and just an example of this the other day, so I'm sure most of you are, or maybe not, but familiar with Youth Week in the community. So this is a provincial initiative where communities across the province have a week dedicated to youth programming. And in Squamish, we've been doing this too for quite some time. I had a little neighbor in my neighborhood kind of skipping past as she does, 13-year-old who lives in our complex. And she, yells at my partner who's outside doing some gardening. And she says, "Oh, hey, Nick, I see that Krista's the manager for youth services and responsible for those youth week events. Can you tell her, like, thanks for the amazing activities of the week?" And so he was pretty proud of that, and then he shared that with me later. But what it's demonstrating to me is that the narrative in Squamish is changing. When I first started in this role, you hear a lot about there's nothing for youth in the community because we don't have a movie theater or a bowling alley or whatever it is. But we have a lot of really great youth programs, and the youth are starting to notice, the families are noticing. I'm seeing that on social media being reflected. So I'm really excited about the trajectory that we're on with our programs. So it's nice to have those kind of stories and those affirmations from the kids in the community. But a lot of this engagement and promotion is, been made possible by coupling our youth services programs alongside the development of Foundry Sea to Sky and moving the youth hub and having that as part of the Foundry Sea to Sky Center. So I just wanted to take a moment to share some of the renderings and a little bit about the development there with you guys. I know that you're pretty familiar with this, but this is just some of the exterior renderings, and the picture to the right is what you'll see when you're looking at the entrance of the youth hub from the skate park. So we've got that half-court basketball court, some community gardens, and then a picnic area before you get to the building. So just a really fun space to be able to activate when the center opens its doors in just a couple months here. And this is a rendering of pretty darn close to what the youth hub is actually going to look like when youth walk into its doors. So even before we knew we were going to be a Foundry Center, we've been engaging with young people in the community about a new space for youth way prior to the Youth Resource Center closing its doors. And so we've done a lot of engagement with youth and families and partners around what the space should look like and how it should function. So everything that you see from the furniture selection to the colors has all been influenced by youth engagement and feedback. And they really like puzzles, apparently, so that's in the rendering there. Great space for video games and movies, and a pool table, of course, had to be included in the space. What else do I have for you? Okay, yeah, and then just another to situate yourselves within the development of the new center and what the youth hub will kind of look like in that space, along with our other service areas. In the bottom right-hand corner is just where that youth hub is. You can see the pool table, the gathering spaces, whether youth come in by themselves or with a small group, there's kind of space for everyone to connect with staff or their peers. It opens up to, and you can see in the top right corner, our kitchen area and another in yellow small group space adjacent to that. The dark blue on the bottom has a separate entrance for kind of more of our Foundry services that will be available on site. And you can see the green, light green as talking rooms. I don't know if you can see my mouse showing that. There we go. Just kind of up in these, the left-hand corner are some of our talking rooms. So those are more like private counseling spaces, which we intentionally situated on the exterior of the building to take advantage of just like the natural light and make a really comfortable space. And the light blue just below that, we have some exam rooms for primary care available on site. And then the larger orange zone in the middle is our collaborative staff zone. So we have folks from different community agencies working together to really provide that kind of collaborative care, all kind of integrated with the Youth Hub and our Squamish Youth Services programming as well. So it's really exciting to have the Squamish Youth Services portfolio kind of dipping into the Foundry Center through the Youth Hub and other programs, but also still maintaining the flexibility to still deliver programs at Brennan Park or wherever else in the community that youth would like to be engaged. So just to kind of end us off here, a little bit about where we've been this year and our future plans. So we've piloted our LGBTQ2S youth program, Youth Collective this year, which youth were really excited about. And we intend to bring that into the Foundry Sea to Sky Center as well. We piloted through Squamish Youth Services employment workshops in partnership with Work BC, and we hosted a job fair. The first half of that was at Brennan Park actually, and the first half was community focused, and then the last half was youth focused. So we had youth come in at the end as well for just some specific youth time. We did a mindfulness program in partnership with Child and Youth Mental Health. We're doing a variety of after school and weekend social and recreational opportunities that we're excited to just continue on with once the new center opens their doors. One example of this is the Friday youth nights on Friday nights at Brennan Park that we offer, which is a really popular program and always has a wait list. But we'll be kind of transitioning that into the new youth hub as our kind of drop-in, our pilot to when we open our drop-in at the youth hub. Then obviously the opening of the Foundry Sea to Sky Center and our community celebration on October 1st. We're gearing up for, and that should be a really great community celebration that I hope you can all attend. Yeah, that's it for me here. So if you want to see a little bit more about specifically our Squamish Youth Services programs, we have an area on our SSCS website dedicated to that. We also have a Foundry Sea to Sky website with information specific to Foundry Sea to Sky, and obviously myself and our executive director, Jay Russell. Or you could even follow us on social media if you don't already, Squamish Youth Services.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions or comments for our guests? Councillor Herford.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting to see how your organization pivoted during the pandemic, which we all did in our own way. You highlighted some of these programs going towards outdoor rec and being more inclusive of those things. Was that a new venture during the pandemic, and is it going to, and if so, is it going to continue once the doors of the building open, or is it going to kind of scale back to being more inside, or is that like, what were the lessons learned there, I guess, is maybe?
Sorry, thanks. Great question. And certainly we had offered outdoor activities previously, even when we were operating the previous Youth Resource Center. They were more sporadic in nature and kind of out trip based, because the primary function of our service delivery was within the the previous Youth Resource Center. It is something though that we did, and that we did definitely put more of an increased focus on through COVID and by kind of necessity of different program restrictions, but something that we certainly intend to keep. And we have a variety of like grant opportunities that are available to us specifically to deliver outdoor wellness programming or outdoor activities in general. So yeah, something that we intend to do. And I know that in previous presentations, Devin has kind of demonstrated that, you know, while we are kind of returning to the youth hub, there will be that kind of focus on place-based programming through the drop-in there, but we're maintaining a bit of a balance in terms of our opportunities to continue to deliver a variety of programs, outdoor programs included.
Councillor Friend.
Thank you. So the slide that's titled year-over-year comparisons indicates 210 individuals in 2021, and that's the only number in that column. So that had me just wondering, is there a goal number for this current year? You did mention that 300 is where we're at now. Is there a goal, and is there a number that you'd like to reach?
Yeah, our current, oh boy, you're never going to invite me back here, hey? You know, our current numbers actually exceed the goal that I would have set for us for this current calendar year. So I'm not too sure what I would say would be our expressed goal in terms of numbers of individual youth reached. You know, Devin's made mention before about how we're really needing to just kind of recalibrate our services in the context of the new Foundry Sea to Sky Center and the Youth Hub, and how all of our programming will fit into our current budget. And so what that will look like for years to come. There will certainly, I'm sure, be a bit of a shift in terms of individual youth that we serve, but we've definitely honed in our processes so that we're more intentionally calculating those individual numbers, programming numbers, general program visits. So I'll certainly be able to continue to report on that. A little bit of goal. I don't know. As many youth as all the youth in Squamish. Thank you for asking.
I also understand that there was a totem carving program at Spirit Creek, or I think that the totem will ultimately go to. How did that go? Was it successful? You're off again, and don't worry, you're not the only person who's had trouble navigating the microphones. What? And you're off again, so the green light.
The green light is on. I'm so sorry. Yeah, so the totem carving program. So the totem carving program was also in partnership with Sea Appleton, who led the paddle carving program with us. And so we had acquired some funding to be able to do the totem carving program with him and some more youth. And as you had mentioned, that totem pole will be situated as kind of a welcome totem outside of the center. It's almost completed. So we had, I want to say, about an 8-week program dedicated to the carving of that with youth. And then over the last week, we had youth and community partners return to paint the totem pole. And then we will be raising it outside the center in about a month's time and then kind of unveiling it at our community celebration. So this has just been a really significant partnership with Squamish Nation and other local groups like the Men's Shed, for example, participating in the collaboration of that program. And yeah, we just are really excited to continue on providing programs and opportunities similar to that as we go, whether it be another portage paddle program or some other kind of art carving workshop working with our partners moving forward.
One more, Chair. Youth Week was May 1st to 7th. Maybe you could give us a little synopsis of how that went.
Yeah, so another really fun time for youth services. We try to have work with partners within the community to offer a variety of programs to youth throughout the whole week. So we had a lot of different partnerships that we engaged in this year through that week. And that's, according to my coordinator, what accounts for our high numbers of youth engagement already this year, because we had a really successful youth week. We had new partners joining us, and I can't remember the name of groups who joined us at this point in time, but offering just really different and unique opportunities for youth, whether it was dance or art or poetry workshops and things like that we were able to offer through Youth Week this year. And then, of course, our youth services team takes on their own events and initiatives. So the job fair actually happened within Youth Week this year as one of the activities that we did. And as well, they did a scavenger hunt at Brennan Park. So we had youth register and they came over to Brennan Park and they did a scavenger hunt outside and posted their videos on social media. And youth in that event in particular really let us know that they had a great time and that it was a really fun activity.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks so much for being here and for the presentation and all the work, especially through challenging few years. I know the pandemic was hard for everybody, but it was particularly hard on the youth in our community. So having you around to be able to provide some services, I think, was really helpful for many of them. My question kind of stems, I think, from Councillor French's first question around the numbers that we're seeing, and great to see some new indicators that you're using to measure. I'm curious about capacity, staff capacity, and resources, especially as Foundry opens up, and know that that's going to be a really critical part to our youth services more broadly going forward, but that is also largely a provincial initiative. And then trying to kind of protect some of those resources that we put forward for just general youth programming. And I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to the balance that's being made there and any challenges that you're seeing emerge as we get closer to the opening of Foundry.
So, no, I'm green. Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's a really important consideration in terms of our program development for the Foundry Sea to Sky Center overall. But as you've already mentioned, kind of protecting Squamish Youth Services as its own portfolio of programs for youth in the community. So Devin and I have worked really closely on how to kind of establish a model that maintains a very specific identity for Squamish Youth Services. And that's, how we kind of coin that portfolio of programs as, having its own identity, and that's in partnership with Foundry Sea to Sky, but also kind of exists as a standalone program within the broader youth services at Sea to Sky Community Services. But certainly it is all within partnership. As I mentioned before, a lot of our programming opportunities are really only made possible, or not only made possible, but really made successful through partnerships within our community to expand our resources and capacity for program delivery, in addition to acquiring some smaller grants throughout the year. And in some years, maybe that averages about 15,000 that we might get from small grants, and then for specific to youth services program delivery. Kind of in the context of Foundry Sea to Sky, there isn't There's certainly kind of a center-based collaboration that will happen between staff by nature of being in the same building, but our Squamish's youth services staff are working specifically in Squamish youth services programs within the center and within the community. And that's the only way that we'd be able to maintain that those broad opportunities within the center and still in places like Brennan Park and that kind of thing by kind of having that separation. And it will probably end up that some of our Foundry staff, for example, might support some of our Squamish Youth Services programming. But in the grand scheme of things, if we're looking at expanding our capacity within Squamish Youth Services specifically, you know, we hope that through some of these indicators and presenting on our different programs that we can work to continually grow that pocket of programs in partnership with all of the other existing programs at the center. But again, trying to maintain that specific identity of the youth hub. And
yeah, I think that makes good sense in terms of trying to maintain that individual identity, and just thanks for the being so cognizant about how we move that forward as we see both programs open up.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. Just building on Councillor Stoner's question a little bit. Just wondering if you can remind me or clarify, you know, we have a rec services department in Brennan Park, and then youth services does programming as well. Obviously, with a youth focus, we have some not-for-profits doing soccer and baseball and so on. Just wondering if you can clarify where the youth services focus is and how it's different than what rec services at the district does, or you know, just sort of define a little bit the distinction there.
How Devin and I would describe this in our some bubbles and diagrams that we've created previously would be that the District of Squamish is really kind of more focused on those recreational based opportunities. So be it at the pool or the arena, and with that more stronger recreational focus. Whereas Sea to Sky Community Services, Youth Services is kind of falling more geared towards kind of the wider scope of social services and that realm of like social and recreational opportunities, and our community partnerships are kind of another bubble in there of partnership and work that we do with just more that broader community focus. So different events and a wider scope of activities, I suppose. But yeah, that SSCS youth services are kind of that social recreational focus. District of Squamish, more a stronger recreational focus, and then our community partnerships kind of landing anywhere and everywhere within that broad community scope.
Okay, thank you. And my other question, a number of the activities require gear like mountain biking, skiing, and climbing and so on. And I'm just wondering, at this point, do you have an inventory of equipment? Do you rely on partners to provide, or how does that work right now?
Don't have a strong inventory of equipment for our programming currently. A lot of those opportunities are made possible through third-party vendors, for example, working with guides, rec guides, and who provide that type of equipment. And sorry, can you just repeat your question one more time?
Yeah, no, I was just curious if there was an inventory or if we were relying on sort of third parties for that right now.
Other questions, Council? I have a couple. In your presentation, you've mentioned employment workshops and job fair. And I was wondering if there's potential for something like a job board or a referral service for employment opportunities. I'll just throw out an example. I know of a private commercial land owner who's retiring and has a real challenge in preparing the property and cleanup and this sort of thing, and is in fact an experienced employer of youth. And it's just an example that pops into my head as something that might possibly be referred to your program. Is that a possibility to coordinate work opportunity for youth?
Yeah, we're really grateful to have a youth services coordinator who supports the development and delivery of youth services programming. So that would be the person to kind of connect with directly. If there is an opportunity like that that presents itself, we'd be really excited to see where it could go. There's obviously a lot of resources and capacity that's required to maintain an ongoing job board, for example. You know, we have pretty high aspirations in terms of the things that we would love to see one day for youth, and you know, various activity calendars and job boards and things like that are in there in our grand scheme, but you know, that requires the resources and time to be able to do those activities. But certainly on those individual opportunities, we're very happy to explore them.
Very good. A somewhat related question, and it's one that I raised when we had an earlier presentation from the Youth Council, and I noticed in all of the energy and excitement and reporting of diverse activities, there wasn't a reference to volunteering. And I wondered whether it's not a gap, but just something that's not emphasized, but how might that be a part of your programming to encourage volunteering? Again, I'll throw out an example. Our teams that look after our trails maintenance in the community and other groups that look after fish counting, their average age is in their 70s. Which means, well, we have to look at maintaining those functions, and these people are also very the types of persons that would be very good to work with together with youth often.
Yeah, I could have spent probably hours talking to you guys about the very specific program opportunities that we've had over the past few years, and we have had multiple opportunities where youth have been volunteering. So one example was, I believe it was last year during the summer, we had our youth workers take a small group of youth to volunteer for, I think it was like Christmas in July at Save On and a food drive that they were doing there for the food bank. So there are these specific opportunities and programs that kind of crop up that are volunteer in nature. We also have good relationships with our partners in the community who are seeking volunteers. So they'll reach out to the coordinator, for example, if they have opportunities that they're looking for volunteers, and we see if we have youth workers available to bring in youth for those specific opportunities. It's not a fully formalized program that we offer like regularly in terms of volunteerism, but again, on that wish list of things that we would like to accomplish one day, that a more formalized program is certainly there.
Very good. And unless there are final questions or comments from council, I'll just leave you with a thought. Ms. Guest and other staff members in the planning department are at present at work on outlining a scoping for an updated Parks and Recreation master plan. And this will be coming back to council in the months ahead. I mention this because you have mentioned in your presentation two projects, the totem carving and the paddle workshops. Both of these projects were very lucky to find workspace. In fact, it's almost by accident. And we can't depend on there being these types of spaces for workshops around. And it might be something that you might raise when that program gets underway, that review of a Parks and Recreation master plan. I'm sure that the youth services program should be featured in that initiative, but you might take the opportunity to consider how you might advise us as to your needs around the community for different spaces like that. I raise this because I'm well aware that was very lucky that you found space for those two initiatives on the Logger Sports Grounds as it happens. With that, thank you very much for your presentation. We've gone a little bit overboard, but I think it's a very valuable discussion. Councillor Finch?
Would staff like us to move receipt of the presentation?
Good question. Ms. Guest, were you interested in a receipt of this report, or? That's fine. We'll do that then. Councillor French, do you want to move receipt of this report?
So moved.
A second by Councillor Herford. None opposed. All in favor. Thank you. Next up, we have Asia Philp from our planning department giving a presentation on the proposed zoning bylaw number 2200 2011 1001 Finch Drive. And so the floor is yours, Ms. Phelps, when you're ready.
Hey, good afternoon. Committee of the Whole. My name is Asia Philp, planner with the Community Planning Department. Today I'll be presenting the second look at the rezoning application for 1001 Finch Drive, which proposes to rezone the property to a new mixed-use comprehensive development zone. So the objective for today is to get the committee's feedback on the design changes, the CAC, the list of permitted uses, and the childcare component for the revised proposal. So at the February 8th Committee of the Whole, Council directed staff to bring the rezoning application back for discussion at a future COW meeting. Council's feedback is summarized here on the slide. It includes comments on the hotel and the childcare components, proposed building heights and proximity to the neighboring development, traffic and parking concerns, and what public engagement will be conducted for this rezoning. A quick overview of the Loggers East neighborhood land use plan is shown here. The subject sites outlined in dashed red line. 1001 Finch is the first rezoning application within the mixed use development or MUD plan designation. This designation specifies that land should provide for a flexible mix of light industrial, office, retail, and upper story residential uses. The site's 3 acres. It's currently used as a temporary portable base site for the Squamish Montessori School. The applicants made minimal changes to the overall design of the site and buildings, but the hotel component has been removed entirely. The main design change is the layout of the parking and open space on site. As you can see here in the previous and new site plans, the parking has been increased so that there's no longer any parking variance required. And as a trade-off to this, the open space has decreased. The open space that fronts Finch Drive is proposed to be activated with a covered seating area and a playground and will be publicly accessible. A trail connecting from Finch to the southern property boundary has been kept in, and this will also be publicly accessible. The applicants also revised the internal layout of the rental units, and they've increased the number of 3-bedroom units from 4 up to 8 units, and this equates to an 18% of the total unit count. So the applicant hasn't changed the height of the building since the February COW meeting, but they provided us with this cross-section that compares the development to the North Yards MUD 1 zone development along Government Road. That's in the northern part of the business park. And this shows that the proposed Finch buildings are set back further from the existing single-family homes. This is primarily due to the 25-meter wide Finch road right-of-way. The Finch buildings also have a lower flood construction level requirement, and they're proposed as 4 stories versus the North Yards development, which is 5 stories. And this is due to the first story of the North Yards being an above ground parkade that they needed to do to achieve the flood construction level. The rezoning application triggers the district CAC policy. The CAC is offered primarily as cash in lieu, shown in the table here. There's the addition of an in-kind pedestrian crossing at Finch and Loggers Lane, which will connect to the corridor trail. So the proposed CAC meets the district's policy targets. In addition to the CAC cash proposed that meets the policy, the applicant is offering the following additional amenities that are not eligible for formal CAC recognition, but that will provide neighborhood level amenities aligned with the Loggers East neighborhood plan. So this includes the 100-space childcare facility to be leased to the Squamish Montessori School, 44 purpose-built market rental units, the publicly accessible park and trail on site, public art installation on site, as well as a commitment to low carbon energy source for Building 1. We don't know the future uses or tenants of Building 2, and so the applicant can't commit at this time to low carbon energy for Building 2 at this stage in the development process. So we've tweaked the list of permitted uses in the proposed CD zone and reduced the number to improve neighborhood compatibility. As I mentioned, the hotel component's been removed. The applicant doesn't have tenants secured for Building 2, and so at this time, we're referring to the space simply as employment space in Building 2. At the request of the applicant, wholesale has been added as a use, and this is in line with the Loggers East neighborhood plan policies for the mixed use development. And the rendering here shows a corner view of that building 2 proposal from Finch Drive. So council requested additional information on the childcare proposal. The applicants outlined they're committing to building the 100 spaces. This equates to 11,000 square feet in building 1, which will be leased to the Squamish Montessori School for a 20-year term. The lease rate will be determined by final construction costs. Therefore, staff consider this to be a market childcare facility, not an affordable facility, and we haven't recognized or credited this as a CAC under our district policy. Staff are supportive of the proposal, however, because the applicant is providing many other amenities in the development, including all of the rental housing, while building out a significant number of market-based childcare spaces that will be operated by an experienced local provider. To inform the community, the project was posted to the district's development showcase. The development sign was posted at the site. A public information meeting was held in person in March 2022 at Howsound Secondary. Notification was delivered to all owners and tenants within 100 meters of the property. 3 community members attended the PIM, but we've also received 14 written comments from the public since the rezoning application was received. And the primary concerns in these public comments are around the hotel use, which has since been removed, parking and traffic issues, as well as the height of the proposed development potentially impacting existing views and casting shadows. So with that, the staff recommendation for today is that council received the 1001 Finch report, provide feedback on the design changes, the CAC, the list of permitted uses, and the childcare component, and that council directs staff to bring the 1001 Finch Drive rezoning application for consideration of initial readings if council is satisfied with the proposal as is. So with that, I'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council will start with questions and eventually settle into our comments. We'll go around the table on the 4 topics that Ms. Philp has outlined that she'd like some feedback on: design changes, CAC offer, permitted uses, and the childcare facility. Any questions? Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. I understand taking out entertainment and tourist-related activities from the list of potential uses on this site. I'm wondering if you could shed some light on the rationale for taking out assisted living, interpretive center, pet daycare, pet grooming from the list of potential uses.
So through the chair, our general approach was to give the neighborhood some more confidence about what uses could go in there. And we just went through step by step, looking at each use, talked with the developer about it, and pulled out anything that we didn't think was an appropriate fit or that might not be compatible with the neighborhood. So it's just kind of like trying to get that large list down in size.
Mayor Elliott.
One of the things that we've been trying to capture when we do a rezoning that involves childcare facilities is capture some of the units for early childhood educators. And I know these are market-based rentals, but was there any discussion, given the size of this childcare center, about the amenity actually being housing for ECEs rather than the amenity being the childcare center itself?
Yeah, so through the chair, we haven't had those conversations, but I think that's a great idea that we can bring back to the applicant and see if there's any opportunity there, given that their current critical amenities is just pure cash in lieu.
And then in adjusting the parking, and I know there were concerns from the neighborhood around parking, does the street design for Finch contemplate any on-street parking? I can't recall at this point.
Yeah, so through the chair, the district engineering department is doing a comprehensive design for all of Finch going to the Upper Finch proposal. That has yet to come to light. But the concept for this portion of Finch, given the 25-meter road right of way, it's likely we can incorporate some parking, but it's to be determined. And we're not running on the assumption that there'll be on-street parking along Finch.
So in adjusting the relationship between parking and open space, were staff supportive of any variance to the parking still? I'm just wondering if this was purely developer-led to make the problem go away entirely, and whether there was discussion about still allowing some variance for the parking.
So through the chair, the developer, I think, certainly likes having all the parking provided and avoiding a variance. We are still proposing the visitor parking to be shared with the commercial parking, the same as we treat all of the mud development. So I guess you could consider that to be a variance, although we've built that into the CD zone. So there's that kind of minor variance, but from a staff's perspective, it would be nice to see perhaps a small variance to claw back some of that open space.
I think I had one more. Oh, what is our definition of wholesale? Is that defined in the zoning bylaw at all?
It is. I don't have it in front of me, but I know that Jonas Velnishkis is on the call, and if he can open up the zoning bylaw and maybe provide that later, we can get that for you. Thank you.
I'll check in on that.
Other questions while we're waiting for Mr. Velindiscus? Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair. Going back to our engineering department doing some legwork on the Finch Drive, I'm curious about the intersection of Finch and Loggers and if there's any foresight on, I know part of the CAC here is to put some paint on between Loggers and Finch, but curious if we contemplated like a roundabout or other sort of calming measures given how quickly people tend to go down Loggers.
Yeah, so through the chair, that is, I would think, being contemplated by engineering as part of the Finch design, but that's something that I'll bring back to Laura Princik, who's the lead engineer for the Loggers East neighborhood plan, for us to have a discussion, because we have not talked about that to date.
Okay, and then on that, when we saw this last, there was a proposal to do all kind of the active transportation frontway for Finch with this proposal, and it overlapped with the Upper Finch. We've now secured that through the Upper Finch rezoning. Does that mean we've entirely lost kind of that dollar value from this application?
So this application, they're giving us just the CAC target for the active transportation amount as cash in lieu. They're not going to provide the trail that's on the Upper Finch developer.
All right, I'm okay for now. Thank you.
Councillor Pettigo.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So we're not proposing to zone for childcare only in the one building. They're signing a 20-year lease and childcare is an allowable use. What happens if the school, for whatever reason, decides not to keep operating? Can they put something else in there? Are they required to have a school or childcare for 20 years? And can you just speak to what restrictions there are?
Through the chair, there's no restrictions on the space. The developer has said that they will do the 20-year lease, but there's no further commitment beyond that. And, you know, if something were to happen to the Montessori school, then in theory, that space could be converted to a non-childcare related space. So there's no further agreements or anything securing that space. And so we haven't recognized or given them really any CAC credit for that space.
Okay, thank you. In other rezonings, though, we have been securing through the zoning exclusive childcare use permanently, or until the zoning
Yeah,
changes.
through the rezoning and or through the land development agreements as well.
Okay, and then on the low carbon, I guess the developer has said they don't want to commit because they might find a tenant who wants a high carbon energy source, but isn't the whole point of the low carbon density bonus and so on to make sure that we don't get a high carbon tenant
Yeah.
in. So isn't it sort of defeating the purpose
Yeah,
of the?
through the chair, I agree. There's this kind of inherent tension for some of, like restaurant uses or places that really need a gas cooking facility or something like that. And so I think that was the idea that the developer had, like if we get a cafe or we get a restaurant in this space and they want a gas cooking range, they want to be able to provide that to them.
Okay, we just converted our rental to induction, and it's faster and more precise, and it's awesome. And I think restaurants are going that way. So, reading the neighborhood plan, it's pretty clear what the expectation is there. So, I guess I'll leave it there for my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. Were there any nods in the CD zone to the childcare use that we just discussed not being sort of baked in as an exclusive use? But I know there's mention of pickup and drop off parking spots. Were there anything else in here that sort of aligns specifically with that use, or did I just get that?
There's designated on-site parking and there's the pickup and drop off shared parking with like the building 2 commercial or employment space uses. But beyond that, there's nothing securing that building 1 floor area for childcare.
Thank you. And I guess that'd be the same with the planned what's labeled as childcare outdoor space to the east of building 1 as well.
Yeah, correct. So that space is shown in the site plan. That space is needed in order to meet the VCH and the provincial requirements for that size of childcare facility. So they'll need to provide that, but there's nothing securing that space like in perpetuity to be dedicated to that childcare use.
Thank you. And we were provided with, and I was asking that question actually specifically because with the expanded parking, putting pressure onto the open space, that childcare outdoor space isn't affected by that change in parking, as I read it here. That's correct?
Yeah, correct. So the childcare outdoor space didn't change between the 2 plan iterations. They need that minimum amount of space. It needs to be provided, and that's not included in our open space calculations. We've just that's severed and part of the development for the childcare.
Okay, thank you. And then I appreciate the comparison to other mixed-use zones as far as proximity to the neighbors and so on. I think some of the concerns around this are about the height from the neighbors is sort of shade access to daylight, which we know is a challenge in the middle of winter. So in this process going forward, is a shade report specifically asked at a certain point?
Yeah, so they've done the shade analysis. So if I just pull up the presentation really quickly, I had a backup slide that had that on there to show. So in this shade, let's see if I can make it bigger than this. Sorry. So the shade analysis, it's challenging to see here, but this is done on the winter solstice, so December 21st. And so this is the shadiest time of the year at 10 a.m. and then at 2 p.m. And you can see that at this, like kind of the worst time of the year, the building barely kind of shades kind of the front and its side yards of some of the existing homes there. I didn't include this analysis that was done in the summertime, but there's not even shading of the road of Finch Drive in the summer.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just the neighborhood plan seems to focus, from my reading of it, on neighborhood services and local employment. The whole walkability sort of thing, and I think that was part of the concern from my perspective in terms of the hotel. And I do see we have neighborhood commercial as a permitted use, but then it's also just restaurant, full stop, retail sales, sort of unqualified, which seems to open up the idea of a destination restaurant or destination retail, which is that what we intended? Because I guess in my mind that goes, it runs into the same issue as the hotel.
Yeah, through the chair, it's really going to be up to the developer who the tenants are going to be for the employment space. Certainly, I mean, we'd like to see stuff that's neighborhood serving, but if it's a really successful, great restaurant, it might serve both the neighborhood and then like the larger community or be more of a destination. That's kind of outside of our ability to control, other than to ensure like that there's adequate parking and yeah.
Further questions, Council? Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry if I just missed this in the package. I'm wondering if you can actually just provide the percentage of employment space versus residential space under the new proposal.
Yeah, it's 50-50.
And then I see the changes in the allowable uses for the employment space, but do we have like a full list of what
Yeah,
the allowable space or allowable uses are?
the draft zoning is in the package, and that contains the full list with track changes where we've crossed out the ones that have been removed and highlighted the one, well, wholesale was the one that was added.
If there's no further questions at this time, we could begin a round of comments focusing on the 4 topics of design changes, community amenity contribution offer, permitted uses, and the childcare facility. Would anybody like to start? Councillor Finch.
Thanks, Chair. No issues with the design changes, and the community amenity contribution offer meets the minimum. And the additional community benefits being brought by the project I find satisfactory. And I'm only going as high as satisfactory on that because other developers in the last few months, in my opinion, have come to the table with more generous contribution plans than this one. Permitted uses, I think that taking out assisted living as a potential use might be short-sighted, and having facilities for young and old in relatively close proximity to each other, I think have advantages. Kids help keep the elderly young, and seniors are great at sharing wisdom. And services for pets also seems like a complementary use in the area. We've already got a number of dog service operations. So if dogs are already a big part of the commercial makeup of this area, I'd like to allow for complementary services like dog grooming. And the childcare facility, we definitely need those spaces as soon as possible, and I have no issues with the childcare part of the proposal. And I'm somewhat supportive of the mayor's thought earlier of finding a unit for an ECE person within the housing portion. And I'll just add one more thought. We as a council have touched this project a few times, and I worry that when we touch projects like this multiple times, we're adding to the developer cost. And I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Elliott, would you like to offer comments at this time?
Sure, thanks. On the design changes, I think they're all right, but I still think there's some give and take on the parking and the open space, personally. This is in a great location. It will be along a future bus route. It's on active transportation, and I'd rather see, now that the hotel isn't going to be there, making sure that there's good bike facilities and end of trip facilities in building 2 for the whatever uses are going to be there, as well as for the childcare use. I think that's important. I do like the activated open space at the front now, with a seating area and a park. Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around the requirements for 100 spot childcare center. So it just seems like a lot of parking, but I think they're going to need a lot of staff and and drop off. So, but I appreciate the sort of nod to a staggered start time. I think that's useful, and I don't know whether we capture that in some sort of agreement as we did for the other childcare facility at zoning or the land development agreement, but I think it should be captured. With regard to the community amenity contribution, I think it certainly meets, doesn't exceed the community amenity contribution, but I do think we should go back and have a conversation about how many units would be potentially provided to early childcare housing. On the permitted uses, I think we could add dog grooming back in. I'm not opposed to long-term care facility or assisted living facility. It really will depend on what amenities are provided in this neighborhood at the end and if there are some walkable services. So I'm a bit on the fence on that one. I know that it says that for 20 years it will be a childcare center, and then it could disappear entirely. I think that if we're rezoning around a childcare facility, and let's face it, one of the reasons this is getting attention is because it solves a huge crisis in our community with this number of spots. I think that we should always reserve a portion of that space for childcare centers because the outdoor space is being provided, which is a requirement. So even if it's not for 100 kids, and in the end it might share with a commercial unit down below, I still think that we should maintain a minimum size for at least a 24 to 36 space childcare facility in that unit to go with the outdoor space that's being provided as part of the rezoning. So I think that's important to me. The shade study, I think only at 4 p.m. potentially shades the houses across the street, but I'm not quite sure whose house isn't shaded at 4 p.m. on a winter evening. So I'm satisfied that the height is not going to be an issue. I think if the Finch Drive road design allows for on-street parking, that we could contemplate again trying to find a better balance between parking and open space. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I go to the next speakers, I wonder if we might go back to, I'd neglected to go back to our planning director, Jonas Viliniskas. I think he had perhaps would comment on the definition of wholesale in our zoning bylaw.
Jonas Viliniskas here. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Mr. Viliniskas, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Really quickly, so I did look up the definition of wholesale, and essentially it is selling to other retailers or contractors. So it's similar use to retail use, other than you're not allowed to make sales available for general public. So it's for targeted audiences.
Thank you. Mayor Elliott?
Mr. Valiniskas, would that requirement ensure that there was no impact in terms of noise, smell, anything like that, if that use was allowed?
It would be treated similar as any other use that produces a nuisance. So there's nothing specific that prevents certain substances from being sold. But in those cases, we would, if there's an effect on adjacent units or adjacent property, we would go through the normal venues that we usually use for nuisance issues.
Thank you. Councillor Herford, would you be prepared at this time?
Thank you. The design change. So going through the list in order it was presented, the design changes. I like the. I'm comfortable with. I do think that there's this push and pull between the parking and the open space, and similar to Mayor Elliott, if we could understand the street design there and how that works with this, could work with this development and its needs for visitor or customer parking, perhaps. Perhaps there's room there. I like having the space in the initial layout that was sort of earmarked as a potential community garden or garden for space for the tenants there. And that's the space that gets used up with the additional parking here. So whether we can land somewhere in between the first iteration and this one, knowing the capacity of the potential capacity of the street parking to maybe absorb a little bit of that load. So some work to be on there, I guess. The community amenity contribution, I agree. I think it's reasonable. I do agree that with staff's assessment that it's not affordable childcare and shouldn't be scored as that. So I appreciate that perspective, and I think that that's okay. It's acceptable. The permitted uses bit I think is interesting. I'd be curious to know more of the rationale around some of those exclusions, because on sort of first pass looking at it, I don't, the pet grooming and the assisted living, for instance, seem pretty innocuous uses. So I don't know, the deeper rationale there would be appreciated, or if it's not there to just be included, but maybe there's something there. And yeah, and I appreciate the nod to the longer lease for the childcare facilities. I think it is interesting being sort of a bit of a third party to their lease negotiations with their prospective tenants, but I do like having that length, and I like the concept of securing that as far into the future as we can. So I appreciate the 20-year piece, but if there's a way, as was mentioned earlier, I think it was Mary Elliott, around a percentage of that space maintaining that use in perpetuity, I think that would be worth pursuing. And yeah, and I think that covers off. And I just, while we're making comments in general, that the shading issue with, I know it's hard to visualize if you're standing there as a resident and it's a bare lot of what's going to be there, but in the deepest, darkest days of winter, that gave me some confidence we're just going to sort of catch the corner of the house there for a short period of time. So yeah, that was a very useful piece. Nice, thank you.
Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, a few things. I would agree with some of my colleagues. I'd like to understand the street design a bit better. In terms of, how do we manage speed along Finch, given the amount of development that's proposed for all along Finch, and the neighbors, like, can we do traffic calming bollards and that kind of thing? And I know this isn't necessarily all the responsibility of this developer, but it would be really helpful in understanding the trade-offs for this project. And I can also imagine, given the number of daycare spaces or the Montessori school, and the neighborhood around, you can imagine we've got this really wide street. And so, what is the safety aspect for all those kids that will presumably be in that area? I think would be helpful to understand that picture. I do feel that we should secure a childcare use in the zoning. If we get 15 years or 20 years down the road and circumstances are significantly different, we can rezone if we need to. And I think where we are now and where we are for the foreseeable future, it's really important to just secure that. And I'm not sure a 20-year lease with one particular entity is sufficient there. So, I don't want to be overly prescriptive, but definitely lean towards some sort of childcare use being secured in the zoning. I think, from what I heard in the discussion around the hotel and so on, I think neighborhood-focused business uses are important, or local employment. But I also, at the same time, don't want to be too prescriptive, because there are local businesses that I'm aware of that don't fit exactly into the way we've defined our bylaws, and some of them I think actually could work quite well in there. So how do we make this flexible for sort of a multitude of neighborhood focused use that's not going to disrupt the neighborhood, but doesn't fit necessarily neatly into a light industrial box or a commercial box? So that's a bit more of a, I guess, a blurry comment, but some flexibility there, again, with that neighborhood focus along those lines. Assisted living, pet grooming, and so on. It's not obvious to me why those wouldn't necessarily be permitted. Going along with this, when I read the neighborhood plan, it says strongly encourage and provide density increases to development applications that commit to achieving the following targets. A, low carbon energy sources to be fully incorporated as the exclusive energy source in the development, full stop, and at least 2 additional targets. And so I think this is falling short of the expectations. And so, I'm happy to support, different sorts of businesses and provide flexibility there. But I think the no gas covenant piece is that's why it's there, to make sure that we aren't getting businesses that require this. And I guess there was one other. Well, yeah, I think, and I understand we're not at the specifics of the outside design will come later, but it's still, even with the wide street and so on, it is a significant change from what's there in the neighborhood. And so trying to figure out the trade-offs and where we can be flexible and so on. And so to me, this is a fairly significant change from what's in that area now. And so that pushes me more to holding a harder line on the childcare and the climate expectations and so on. I think, the extra height and so on is consistent with the neighborhood plan. I guess I'm just trying to balance all these things, and I think we should be pushing a little more on the childcare piece and the climate piece. Thank you.
I note in the several pages of feedback from the public that is included with our package. Most of it is dated from back in March. And at that time, the main topic of conversation and of concern was the hotel proposal. And I'm concerned or interested in the fact that when we go back to the public again, when we're ready to do so, that there may be other issues that might come forward. And one of them, concerning design changes or design, is the form and character. I think that there's some very good, nice efforts made in this building, in the facades, but one concern I have is with the color of the standing seam roof. And it's a bit of a trend. I remember when silver cars came in to be a trend in the automobile world, and then it went to black cars, and we have a lot of black roofs, a lot of dark coloring in our community palette in newer buildings. So I am concerned about that. Of course, this will go to our advisory design panel, and I'll be interested in the views that might, in the exchange that might take place there. So that is a concern I have, is especially for, now there is emphasis in the report on streetscapes and pedestrian perspectives, but there's also the perspective from Loggers Lane. And it is a prominent building, and with a rather dark facade on that second level for passers-by, if you like. But maybe for the neighborhood as well. Maybe those other things that will be noted in the forthcoming public input. So that's on the design changes. I am otherwise satisfied with the rationale, if you like, or the illustration provided by the development proponent on the setback and the building height and the shadowing as well. I think I find that to be convincing, and that does not present a concern for me. Moving to the CAC offer, I note the policies that are emphasized by staff with respect to CAC credits, and I support those. I would like to suggest, with respect to the mural that is offered, and I have raised this before, that the development proponent be encouraged to work with the Arts Council as our community public art advisor. And the reason I emphasize this is that I have noted that we might maybe we should be expanding our repertoire of public art practitioners in the community, and including from beyond the community. We have one extended family that is accounting for a large portion of our public art projects. I have nothing against them, but I think that I would like to see a robust tendering process for public art projects of substantial nature, such as this one will be. Let's like go aim for high standards in public art selection tendering processes. And so I think that the answer is to encourage partnerships with the public art advisor. But that's a voluntary thing according to present policy, but I do recommend it. On to the permitted uses. I share the interest in my colleagues in the revisiting the pet grooming and pet daycare. However, we've heard in previous presentations for downtown and the business park that pet care has some parking demands. And this is why we've moved away from downtown as a location for pet care facilities. And in fact, are emphasizing the opportunity of the business park and its parking. So does it fit there? I don't know the answer to that. But I do support another look at that specific permitted use or set of uses. On permitted uses, but also over to the childcare facility, I don't know the answer as to whether the 20-year is something that should be revisited, whether we should look for more security for for retaining the childcare there. And the reason why is that I think that this is going to be a neighborhood hub for a lot of recreation facilities which are growing. One day we will have 2 sheets of ice, we hope. We plan to have expanded field facilities. There will be an increased number of events in this area. And I know from the former operators of the hotel and the business park, the Mountain Retreat Inn, they get very busy during Brennan Park area events. And I think this will only grow. So I think we should consider that this is a well-placed hub for a number of things. And also in relation to the large set of recreation facilities, community event facilities that are nearby. So I'd like to keep an open mind about what might evolve here and what might be optimal for this neighborhood hub and its spaces in future. I don't know the answer as to where we will be with daycare facilities in 20 years. Maybe none of us do. So keeps options open. Recognize that this is going to be a neighborhood that will evolve and function along with the facilities across the road in Brennan Park. I guess that is, just wanted to note that we are going to hear back from engineering, according to you, Ms. Phelps, regarding that intersection at Finch Drive and Loggers Lane. I believe that's a very important consideration, and as well as the parking on Finch. And with respect to the parking, I'm happy with the setup as it is now. And again, recognizing this is going to be a neighborhood hub also for visitors and patrons of the recreation facilities nearby. Councillor Herford.
Yeah, thank you. I just realized I forgot a piece of my feedback was around the ECE accommodation, and I think that would be great to accommodate in here in some aspect, and ideally in perpetuity, because even if this isn't a daycare if we can't if we can't secure that use in perpetuity, there will be need for accommodation for our ECs, although maybe that the funding of that will change over time and the need to make specific accommodations will drop away. But right now there's a need for that accommodation for those ECE workers and affordable accommodation for them. So I don't know how that fits in and if that maybe comment is part of the CAC discussion or a concession with the term of the childcare or something. But I do think it's worth pursuing.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I'll just provide my feedback as requested by staff. So on the design changes, I'd say there actually haven't been all that many design changes since we saw it last. So I think it is fine. The two pieces that stood out for me from correspondence were concerns around shading. And I think that the shade impact study shows that that's not a huge concern, even at the darkest of days that we have. But I do think that there's been a trade-off made between the parking and the green space that I'm not wholly comfortable with. I think that there is a happy medium from where we first saw it and where we're seeing it today, especially as we potentially see the opportunity for some on-street parking on Finch. And that other piece around kind of the broader idea of how Finch Drive will interact with Loggers Lane is something that I'm curious about as this continues to move forward and how we think about circulation of traffic in the area. I agree with my colleague, Councillor Pettingill, on trying to push for a no gas covenant in both buildings. I think that's the way we need to be building for the future. And the restaurant industry can catch up with induction ranges, and that might make it a little bit more challenging, but restaurant is just one of a multitude of permitted uses in this space. And so it also may not be a restaurant that's there. With regards to permitted uses, I would like to see it broadened a little bit more. I think that removing the hotel use was a great move. I wasn't supportive of that when that first came around. I think we can add the pet grooming back in. I'm a little bit curious about adding entertainment back in just from the perspective of maybe getting a bowling alley. I don't know. I think that there's some elements in the entertainment category as I read the zoning bylaw that could actually maybe fit well here. As we kind of think about this as a potential kind of neighborhood hub. The other piece that's in the Loggers Lane neighborhood plan is called light impact manufacturing, which I actually don't really know how we would define that, and I can't find how it meets up with anything in our zoning bylaw. But I do wonder, now that we're not entirely clear on what's going on those upper levels of the employment space, what maybe some form of light impact manufacturing is possible up there, and I'm not sure, but I think we could consider that, given that it's in the Loggers East neighborhood plan more broadly. The community amenity contribution offer, I think, meets the policy. It doesn't go above or beyond, but cash is really useful, especially at this point in time in our community where we have a lot of assets that we need to maintain and refurbish. So, but I do think it's worth a conversation around the ECE units and earmarking those for a few units, at least for ECE workers. And then with regards to the childcare facility, and I think this is where the community amenity contribution could be bolstered a little bit. I do think that there's risk of just having the 20-year lease with the Montessori school alone. So I think if we are considering this as a rezoning around a childcare facility, I'd want to ensure that we're getting those 20 years regardless of who. Like, great that if it's the Montessori, but what happens if the Montessori falls through, and then does that mean that we lose the childcare spaces 10 years into a 20-year agreement? So I would like some certainty around that. And then I agree that capturing at least a portion of that square footage in perpetuity is important as well. So those are broadly my comments on the 4 items. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner, and sorry for leapfrogging ahead of you in the roster here. Ms. Philps, we probably don't have a consensus on all matters here, but we have opportunity to go back to the public. Are you satisfied with the feedback that you've received? Something that you can work with and with the developer for the next steps? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I just, I know the recommendation is for first and second reading. We've had some comments. I wonder if it's reasonable to put forward a motion that allows staff to, you know, I guess if staff feels like they've addressed all of our comments, I'm happy to have this come back for second. If not, give staff the discretion to bring it back for one and two readings. I'm not sure if that's a reasonable.
Mayor Elliott.
Through the chair, we talked about this last time, and council always has discretion to only give one reading. Yeah, so I would rather not argue it now and just let it come back.
Final comments. We have a recommendation. Would somebody like to put forward that staff recommendation? Councillor French and a seconder, Councillor Stoner. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, notwithstanding some of my comments, I think there's a lot to like about this project, and would encourage the developer and staff to work together to address these comments and bring back something we can give two readings on and get moving with this. So hope to see that. Thank you.
Councillor French.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in speaking in favor of the motion, and thinking one step beyond first and second reading, I'm also looking for potential community feedback on where we're at now, or where we land as this gets to public hearing.
I'll call the question. None opposed. Motion's passed. Thank you, Ms. Phelps. We have a recess scheduled, Council. Shall we, we're just about on time here. Shall we return in 10 minutes at 2:40? Thank you. Welcome back to the Committee of the Whole. We have next up Mr. Roland Russell, our Senior Financial Analyst, reporting on a quarterly financial report. That is the first quarter of the year 2022. This is to be followed by Ms. Boxford, our Chief Financial Officer, on the financial plan upcoming. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, we have a short presentation ahead of us with respect to the financial plan. Sorry. Financial plan's next. My apologies. Financial report. So, with respect to quarter one, I think the key element that we want to remind council of is not too much happens in this report, okay? Because, and it's, well, it's just, it is what it is. And that doesn't sound like a great thing to say, but that's the truth of it. Because although we moved procurement up, we were able to do a lot more procurement in Q1 than we have historically, and that was a result of December approval of the financial plan. But even with moving procurement up, the spending, the project spending hasn't really started to ramp up yet by the end of March. So by the time they send out the tenders and get everything going, they've chosen their contractors, but they haven't spent a whole lot of money. So what you will see is that there's not a lot of project spending. A lot of the results are going to say in progress, etc., those types of things. And that is what it is. So on the operating results for all our standard core operating areas, probably the two major things that should be highlighted is one, our major revenue comes in June through taxes and utilities. So you'll see on a large number of the areas that our revenues are low compared to budget, maybe 3 or 5% in some areas. And the other aspect would be that seasonal spending hasn't started yet. So areas such as parks or public works that ramp up over the summer because they do more construction work and things like that, they also haven't started to gear up for their busiest seasons. So that's where I come back to. There's not a whole lot for us to highlight on this specific report. That being said, try to just zip through it. So next item, on the special operating projects, there are 64. 4 have been canceled or delayed, and 6 have been completed. So the fact that you're seeing projects completed this early in the year, that's a result of the early approval of the financial plan. It allows us to continue on with projects that were already in progress and ensure that they're wrapped up earlier. So with respect to the canceled projects, I'm just going to make a comment on 2 of them. The recycling depot pre-design was canceled, and that the rationale there is at this point in time, we were anticipating that GFL may be looking at relocating their existing location, and we would have to find or redesign our recycling depot. At this point in time, that has not occurred, so they're not going to move forward with that in 2022. The other item is Sea Sky Healthy Community Collaboration, and the rationale there is that Vancouver Coastal Health didn't go forward with this project, and as a result, we did not have to make a contribution or collaborate with them because the project was canceled. So those are the comments I'm going to make with respect to our special operating projects. With respect to our capital projects, we have lots of them, 90 in fact. The one project that I want to highlight that is canceled / delayed is the Park Satellite Project. The Park Satellite Project was going to take place in a facility that is located on the library parking lot, sort of right behind us. The people that are currently occupying that space, decision has been made to extend their stay. And as a result, the Park Satellite, downtown Park Satellite, is being requested to find another locale. And so that project has been canceled for 2022. Comments on some of the projects that are completed. One is the library carpet replacement, which you may have noticed if you've toured around the library after it opened at the end of January. And the second one is the landfill gas flare and capture. The project was complete. They were just awaiting a few pieces of equipment to be installed early this year because due to supply chain timing, they hadn't received the equipment at the end of last year. So that's a commentary on some projects that were completed and another one that's been canceled. With that, I will open this to committee for questions and discussions.
Questions so far, Council?
Stop sharing my screen. Oh, sorry. By pushing the correct button.
Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, hopefully I'm not jumping ahead, but in the list of specific projects, there were 2 which were being pushed off because there was an overrun. It was the hardball safety upgrades and Dryden River Gate. And I had sort of 2 opposing thoughts. And the one thought was, well, you know, how much is the overrun? You know, assuming it's from just supply chain and all that sort of thing, should we just find a way to get it done, whether it's council contingency and not push these projects off another year? And the other half of me thought, well, actually, no, there's an overrun. We didn't budget for it. We tried to envision these sorts of things and build it into our budget. So maybe it is best to take a pause and reevaluate. But I'm just trying to wonder if staff can comment on where that threshold is, where we decide like it is actually best to take a pause on some of these and wait and see where we are next year.
Sorry, through the chair, Gary Buxton here. Let me turn my video on. The choice to sort of proceed or cancel is very much driven by that particular project. It may be materials, in which case there are no choices. One of the things we've looked at is whether or not we can repurpose some of these projects, but that does require a budget amendment to move funds from one project to another. So it's not, we as staff don't simply have the ability to move money between projects. So without a budget amendment, simply scope change of that magnitude requires council approval. So It's driven by the specifics of the project, and we're somewhat limited by the budget process itself, that we're just not able to sort of say, oh, well, that one's under budget, we can move funds from that into that and make that up. We do that occasionally if the projects are related between, let's say, water projects or sewer projects. That's often predicated on where the funds come from. So you can't fund a sewer project from the water utility and vice versa. So it's a bit of it's situational, and it's a bit of a chess game of where you can and cannot move parts around. So if we can proceed with projects, if there's some way, we will. In these two cases, I just don't think that it's possible without a budget amendment or more budget, which means next year.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that clarification. The other question is looking at some of the procurements we're doing, and it had the weighting criteria that we used for different, I guess, RFPs, and the weightings of the different criteria weren't consistent. And I was just wondering why that is. I guess in my mind, I was assuming we'd have, 15% environmental social, 30% cost, and so on. And that same level of weightings would be applied to everything. And as a whole, on one project, everyone might score low in a particular category. And that's just the way it would be, but you'd still find someone that floats to the top. So I was curious why we seem to be changing the weightings of the different expectations from RFP to RFP.
I would ask our manager of procurement, Mr. Jeffrey, I believe he's on the line, if you could comment, please.
Thank you, Mr. Roland Russell. Through the chair, quick answer is basically every procurement we look at differently, and the rated criteria is a huge piece on how we select proponents or contractors or consultants. So we kind of take a tactical approach through our procurements. Councillor Pettingale, in the sense that we look at the procurement, what it is we're procuring, and what makes the most sense from a rated criteria perspective. That's why there's not a lot of consistency, but at the same time, there is consistency as in how we're approaching consultants and contractors, but it does depend on the procurement, what weighting we assign to each criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. Further questions, Council? Mayor Elliott, and followed by Councillor Herb.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Ralston about the ongoing delays at Honeck Park. So we had funds that carried over from 2021 to 2022, and now your comments in the table suggest that we're going to see substantial funds carry over from 2022 to 2023. So I wonder if you could just highlight where we're at with the permitting challenges, and then when we can actually build, if we can get there this year because of fish windows and all the other things.
Through the chair. So we are currently working through permitting challenges for the project. We've actually just received permits for under the Navigation Protection Act. So that's good news, but we're continuing to struggle through DFO permitting challenges. And we're basically working on a revised application currently and working with our consultants to basically modify our habitat compensation. So we hope to resubmit our application, and hopefully we'll receive, well, we're currently in our review period for our DFO application. And once we submit our revised application, we'll still have a short period for the review period to end. And then there's a mandatory 90-day First Nations consultation period. So we're still a minimum of 4 months out from having an approval. And I say minimum because it's not clear what would come back from the First Nations consultation piece. Although we have been completing referrals and engaging closely with Squamish Nation on this project. So hopefully that will facilitate the process. But there's still a decent road ahead, and it's a very challenging process to try and navigate some of the regulatory hurdles here. We're shooting to begin construction as soon as possible, but it's looking like a minimum of 4 months before we could receive permitting approvals. And as soon as we do have those permitting approvals, we'll be putting the project out to tender and getting going. So we're doing everything we can, but we're struggling through some of these permitting challenges.
Mr. Olson, given that the dike was completed by a developer further north and had to provide habitat compensation, has something changed significantly? I would imagine that we would have based ours on what they had approved. So I'm just trying to figure out what's causing this length of delay.
So my understanding is that there have been changes to the Fisheries Act and the regulatory process in sort of the post-Harper world. And so DFO is applying a more stringent lens on these things than would have been applied at the time when the previous sections of dike were constructed. So we're definitely facing a more challenging regulatory process than we would have if we had built this project, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that's probably the main change, and that's leading to the difference in process here. And we've reviewed the habitat offsetting and compensation that was used for the dike sections to the north, and basically concluded that there's no way we would receive approval for that with today's regulations. So we're working on a much more advanced and comprehensive habitat compensation program that involves intertidal plant benches, potentially some floating islands, some herring nets, or herring nets surrounding our pilings. It's quite a comprehensive habitat compensation approach that we're proposing and going to be resubmitting to DFO within the next week.
Mr. Wickham, did you wish to add further comments at this time?
Yes, just very briefly to say that part of the way DFO works is that they evaluate how compensation is working. And so there's also some learning curve there, that the compensation that was completed in the form of reef balls for the northern reach weren't very successful. And so that's part of the reason that we have a much more comprehensive and very different compensation approach.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Jeffrey, I have another question for you around the procurement piece. I'm really pleased that we're doing an IPD for the Tantalus Fire Hall. And I'm curious how that might help us in the end in this inflationary environment. But my question was around, you ranked the interview worth 50 points. And I'm curious why in an IPD, why that's so important.
That's a really good question. I love that question. It's one of the things about IPD, it's all about relationship and team building. So if you made it through that far in our procurement process, through the first 100 points or whatever it was, by then it really, the decision was coming down to how well you performed and how well the team gelled in that interview process. So it's really a reflection of the principles of what IPD is based on. It's based on being collaborative and delivering a project collaborative where everybody wins. So that's kind of why it was reflected in the rated criteria on that one. And it was a really, really well run process in the interview process. We spent a lot of time thinking about the questions we wanted to ask and what we were looking for. We had some really good help from a consultant on that. And I think it worked out well so far. We'll see. The proof will be in the pudding when the project gets delivered.
Thank you very much. Chair, I just have one more question. And I guess it's a general question for our finance team in that, Q1 ends at the end of March and we're receiving the Q1 report at the end of June. And as you said, Mr. Russell, there's not always a lot to report in Q1, but you still have to do all the work. And so I guess my question for both of you, but also for my council colleagues is, given that we're doing year-end and SOFI reports and annual reports that follow the end of the year, do we find this level of reporting after Q1 the right thing to do? Or should we wait till Q2 for our first variance report when we have more construction underway, more tenders out, more progress being made? So I guess I want to explore whether maybe all we get is the table so we know staff have started the work. But do we need a quarterly variance report that's really not going to tell us much? And also our revenue doesn't come in as well. So it's quite an imbalance until we receive tax anyway. So I guess maybe I'll go to the finance team first, and then council, if you want to maybe add your thoughts as we go through the discussion.
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Elliott, for that question. Staff have had some discussion about that exact thing and looking at, do we bring 3 reports forward, Q2, 3, and 4? Wanted to give it a shot this year, so a trial with the new adoption date in December, and just to see where we are at with our Q1 report. So certainly would appreciate that opportunity to just bring the 3 reports, absolutely, because as Mr. Russell sold so highly in the report, there wasn't a lot of information provided. So yeah, absolutely, we'll look to council to give us that direction. Thank you.
Further thoughts on this? I'll go first to Councillor Finch and then to Councillor Stoner.
Thanks, Chair. And so on this, we've budgeted 30 minutes in this meeting. Is that maybe more than it deserves? I think possibly, yes, as a Q1 report in light of the small amount of information being generated. Although I think that there is value in a Q1 report, and as evidenced by the mayor focusing on One Egg Park and the delays there. So I see value in a Q1 report. I just don't know that it needs 30 minutes, 15, 20, maybe. Thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a few quick questions. Mr. Jeffries, I noticed that there's a few lines in the procurement quarterly report under the evaluation criteria that just say low bid. And I'm curious if you can speak to when we throw our evaluation criteria out the window and just go for price?
We don't do that very often, Councillor Stoner. Most of the times that we are doing that, it's usually a second round competition. So I mentioned the pre-qualified list we've done for consultants. So we've used all the other rated criteria. Really, the only thing that's left is price. So that's typically when we'd go on low bid, or if it's a really low dollar procurement that doesn't really need a lot of fancy criteria associated with it, we may do a low bid in that situation as well.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you. And then just one question around project updates, I think for Jesse Morwood. Curious where we're at with the water meter installation project. I know it's been a multi-year project and it says that work is slowly proceeding. I'm curious how close to the finish line we are with that one.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Did we lose you, Mr. Morwood? Yeah, we could hear you. Mr. Buxton.
Sorry, if Mr. Morwood has departed, then I get not literally. Now I'm water meters, back to water meters. Yeah. Yes, that a large part of that was actually carryover from last year. So a lot of the work was ready to go, and I believe even tendered last year. So I did speak to Jesse about this yesterday, and yes, the work is largely done. We just need to be invoiced for it because we were literally ready to go in January, and we had the designs done, we had the sites picked, so they were ready to go. So yes, it is largely done for this year.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. And just in response to the mayor's question, I don't think a quarterly variance report is necessary for Q1. I think it's helpful to have a project update and perhaps the procurement list, but I don't think the quarterly variance is necessary for finance staff to put that together. I think, yeah, it's not providing the information that we need so early on in the year. So happy to take that off your list of things to do at this busy time.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I had a couple questions around the there's a couple notes around cost escalation, and I'm familiar with supply chains and cost escalation. And the Dryden River Gate numbers, though, although the hardball safety just said there was cost escalation, there wasn't a dollar value associated with it. But the Dryden piece, the increase requested is the same size as the project. And I was just curious what led to that, and where and if there are some economies of scale with other work for that will hopefully be executed in that area in the not so distant future. So I'm just curious where that, I guess, those two pieces of that.
Through the chair, this I assume this question, I haven't been involved directly with the Dryden Creek Gate, so I was assuming that maybe Mr. Jody Barron, the roads and drainage supervisor, would actually respond to this, but I'm not sure if he's actually on this call. But I can respond to the second piece of that, and potentially integrating with larger scale upgrades that we have proposed for the area, and I guess to expand on that, you're referring to dike upgrades at the Eagle Viewing and CHM Reserve. So we're continuing to advance the design and feasibility investigation for dike upgrades in the area, although that is at a minimum 3 years out before we'd be able to begin construction. And my understanding from discussions with Mr. Barron is that we need to replace that floodgate on an earlier time scale than we would be actually completing dike upgrades. So I don't see any reason why we should wait until we're doing wider scale dike upgrades to do sort of a more pressing and small scale fix on that Dryden Gate. So budget pending, I think we should advance that work on a nearer timescale and not be held hostage by these much wider scale upgrades in the area.
Thank you for the specifics on that one. And I guess in a more general sense, just sort of this piece, cost escalation sort of raises a bit of a flag. And I wonder, maybe it's for procurement to chime in on just how we're approaching the fact that some of our projects that we've scoped, that work, there's that lag time and things are changing quickly, to make sure that our budgeting is correct and our projects are executable. And how much of a factor do you think this would be going forward as we see this, the Q2 report or further into our financial plan with these cost escalations? And maybe this one in particular is an outlier and because of its doubling in nature, but sort of in the general sense.
I can answer that just high level, Councillor Herford. We're seeing that in nearly every project, and it's something that's factoring into all our decisions that we're making. So on collaborative projects like the IPD, it's we've kind of got the right strategy in place to deal with cost escalation and market activity. So other projects that we do with the construction management model are very similar. So we do have our kind of fingers on the pulse, so to speak, you know, with working with contractors and consultants who are pretty engaged in their supply chain, so they know what's going on, and it really could affect some of the design decisions that get made. So that's kind of a broad overview of how we're dealing with it corporately. I mean, if you wanted to get into the more project specific examples, then it'd be best to talk to, you know, Cal or Jesse.
No, thank you. That was helpful. And then I have one more, if that's okay. There was a note that the Parks Op project was moved to 2024 for some efficiencies of combining projects. And I just wondered, that's a $50,000 project. And I just wondered if that was through, one, if that 2024 was the correct time, and if we've already taxed for this, or if those funds came from a different area.
I might address that. 2024 is the correct time frame. There's been no taxation for this project, as the project is funded through reserves, and the $50,000 is for preliminary design. This is not a $50,000 project. It's about a $2 million project. It was delayed to coincide with an update of work being done at Brennan Park, and to coordinate that. And you will see the results of this when you see the new financial plan, which will be coming to council late summer, early fall.
Thank you. Further questions, Council? I will just offer one of my own, or a couple of comments on the matter of reporting this first quarter financial report. I think that it might well be something that we could address as an information report and not have the time we have today allocated to it, because there is, after all, the opportunity to ask questions or to pull a report, an information report from the agenda, or refer questions back to staff. I appreciated the opportunity today to have the matter of the Wengi Park Dike addressed in Mayor Elliott's question. I was planning to ask the same, and I have a couple of comments to make, but just in summary, I think we could have gotten by perhaps with an information report, but this is the first go round, and but that would be my my suggestion. Now, what I wanted to make a comment about was, first of all, the use of the old fire hall building behind us. It comes up as the proposed park satellite office. And this is a project that is delayed, the site being unavailable due to its present use, which is as a safe injection site. And my comment, I'm not necessarily asking a question, is that perhaps we need to be looking at a collaborative planning process for a future or long-term safe injection site, a collaboration with Vancouver Coastal Health, Helping Hands, Sea to Sky Community Services. We haven't discussed this, but it would appear that that would be something that we might consider. The second comment I wish to make relates to Councillor Stoner's question regarding interpretation of low bid in the report. And I have an example of that, and that was for the Pioneer Way vegetation removal. And there are 4 firms listed as having submitted the bid. And they include companies which regularly ask questions of me as a councillor as to who's doing what and whose machine is that. And for Mr. Jeffries, just by way of a comment, some of these machinery companies, excavators and dump trucks and so forth, they are local companies which have substantial equipment yards here in Squamish and pay quite substantial property tax bills. And this is a comment that I'm receiving more than once over the last few months from more than one of these firms. And so, again, it's just a comment that perhaps in our future, when we come back to review the procurement policy again, that we consider the definition of local firm or reconsider the definition of local firm. These companies do suggest this. Right now, the definition is a local business license. But these companies are paying substantial property taxes. And one question that I have received is, do the neighboring municipalities have the same policies? Is it a level playing field? Finally, some of these companies are underemployed right now due to slowdowns in forestry because these equipment are being used for road building otherwise and that sort of thing. So it's just a comment on a general procurement policy as we may revisit it in future. What is the definition of local firm and how might this come up as we evaluate bids? And I'll leave it at that for my questions and comments. Council, any further points? Councillor Mayor Elliott, followed by Councillor Herford and Councillor Pettigrew.
I think it's important for Mr. Jeffrey to just address how we can still follow the trade agreements and how we can contemplate local bidders, because we can't preferentially designate contracts for local bidders unless they're under the trade agreement threshold. This one isn't. So I think it's important for Mr. Jeffrey to actually respond to your comment instead of just leaving it out there that there is a way to do this, and there might not be. But anyway, if the chair permits, I think it would be helpful for Mr. Jeffrey to respond to your comments.
Thank you for your suggestion, Mayor Elliott. Mr. Jeffries, if you may happen to have a comment to offer.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to comment on that. It's one of those tricky ones. Like, we have to deal with the trade treaties, and they specifically say, you can't discriminate based on locality. But we do have the opportunity, especially when the procurement's under the trade treaty threshold. So any kind of construction project under $200,000, we are targeting local where we can, and we're specifically spelling that out in our procurement documents that our preferences for local and in those contract opportunities as and when they arise. When they start hitting those trade treaty thresholds, we're kind of looking more for a community benefit, and asking questions around local employment and that kind of thing. And yeah, that's kind of where we're going with that, is just looking for local benefit and how we can do that. So it is very much on our mind, and it's something we're always thinking about, how we can invite or include more local companies in bidding on our opportunities. So I really appreciate the comment and the feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. I believe I had Councillor Herford up next, followed by Councillor Pettingill.
I was actually just indicating that Mary Elliott had her hand up, but now that a question has come to mind, now that we have Mr. Jeffries here. So I was curious about the, given those restrictions around the procurement, if there was opportunity to, or if it was appropriate to sort of phase projects to keep them in the right space, that we can have our maximum impact of our social procurement policies. Is that something that's that also runs afoul of the regulations?
That's actually a good question, because it kind of leads into how we deliver our projects. So one of the things about the IPD model and the construction management model is we can break our procurements down into smaller packages, which give local companies better opportunity to bid. At the moment, it's kind of a situation where anybody bids, we're really appreciating it, because it's a pretty tight market. It's a bit of a struggle to get anybody to work or bid on contracts or whatever. So when it gets back more to normal, we would. That's why I like the CM model and the IPD model. You do have the opportunity to break packages down into smaller parts so that local contractors, consultants have a better opportunity of bidding on the work.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. And just my thoughts on the scheduling or what we get in Q1. To my mind, a lot of this is, I would expect eventually with the TTP work to come out as, you press a button and there's the report. And I understand it's going to take some effort to get there, and we're not there yet. So eventually, though, I don't think it's unreasonable to get this in Q1. There's also some narrative discussion in there, and that's a piece that's always going to require some time. And so I would accept that cost benefit in Q1, maybe it's not worth it, and I think that's fine. In terms of why I appreciate what we have here, it's, you know, at a high level, I want to understand, is there some sort of evolving trend that we should be aware of, and some sort of issue? And so knowing somehow if that's coming out, as long as we have that, that takes off some of the pressure. The other piece that I think, you know, I almost have mixed feelings in the detailed special project report, for example. On the one hand, I worry that it invites a level of micromanagement on sort of tasks from council. But on the other hand, when the community wants to know, like, hey, are you working on this thing that's important to me near my house? I think it provides some transparency there. And so that's one of the real values I see in this. And so maybe there's other ways to achieve that, or maybe there's little bits of detail, like some of the numbers or variance numbers we can leave out and ease some of the burden. So I guess all that to say, you know, those are the sorts of reasons why I like this. If there's other simpler ways to achieve that, that's great. And then also, I do think it's reasonable to focus our work towards quarters where we have a bit better information. And if we just don't have great information in Q1, maybe we won't kill ourselves to get that report. Thanks.
Mira.
Through the chair, I just want to test Councillor Pettengill's report that one day we'll get to a point through the TTP that we push a button and the quarterly variance report comes out. I'm just wondering if you would like to respond to that.
Thank you, through the chair. Although one could wish, I don't know that we'll get there. A lot of what this report does is a lot of collaboration and a lot of discussion. The schedules could be more push button, but I don't know that that would achieve a significant amount of the work. It really is that input and discussion and collaboration that drives a lot of the work.
So you've heard a few different opinions about whether we should have a Q1 variance report or not. And I've heard some support for producing at least the list of projects that are underway, and those that might have been canceled or delayed or at risk. I've heard support for having the list of procurements completed in Q1. And I guess for me, obviously council would want to know anything from Q1 that will be a big variance that will impact our financial plan. But I didn't hear a lot of support for producing the quarterly financial variance report. I think people like to see the blue, like the list, which I think is more work for our budget managers than for finance. So yeah, I'm just wondering where you think we might be able to go with the feedback you've heard today.
Through the chair, I think exactly that. I think if we would keep out the operational report at first, because it really doesn't tell too much of the story, we can highlight some of the key elements, provide the project list, but perhaps only, again, commentary around things that really have an impact, have shifted, rather than comment almost on every line. And then I did hear that possibly we have it just for information, and that it could, questions could arise, and we keep the actual meeting time, smaller, or perhaps not at all, and it could be almost considered like a consent agenda. That is sort of what I'm hearing, if that's what council is directing.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? We have a recommendation that the District of Squamish receive the Q1 2022 quarterly financial report for information. Councillor French, seconded by Mayor Elliott. Any opposed? Motion passed. Now, Mayor Elliott, please go ahead.
I'm going to attempt this. That council directs staff to, in future, bring forward a quarterly a Q1 report that includes the project list, noting any significant unexpected changes, and the procurement list, and any financial narrative within the staff report that council needs to be aware of.
Is there a seconder? Further comments, discussion? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carried. Did our recording secretary have that clear enough? Thank you. Over to Ms. Buxford for the 2023-27 financial plan direction and timeline.
Thank you, Council. My name is Linda Glenday. I'm the CAO here at the District of Squamish. And beside me, as you know, is Heather Boxrud, our CFO and General Manager of Financial Services. We're here today to introduce our financial planning process for the 2023-2027 five-year financial plan. So today is really about process and timeline. Getting into the actual budget side of things will occur later in July and then subsequently in September after the break. Okay. Similar to previous years, the key drivers that define our budget or inform our budget are above in order. So obviously life, safety, legislative, risk, and then any of our master plans drive our budget, the district strategic plan, and including the climate emergency, which in previous years we've highlighted both our mitigation and adaptation efforts. And then last is a little difficult to see, but no less important, is the organizational plan. This slide is important. These are the principles that we brought to the budget managers at the beginning of this year. So over the last years, we've gotten much better, and last year particularly, at planning long-term budget-wise. So truly looking at a 5-year timeline versus really focused on the first year, and we'll deal with the other 4 next time. So this year, what we have indicated is that bringing to council the budget this year will be, again, that long-term focus in terms of we are planning out as best as possible for 5 years. And in terms of what we will be presenting to council is highlighting those changes to the 5-year financial plan that you saw last year. So similar to a consent agenda, the entire budget will be provided. But in order to honor council's valuable time, what staff will do is primarily focus on anything that's changed from last year, including things that, as you've seen with our variance report, cost escalations that have occurred. So managers have been told if a scope of a project or scope of an initiative has changed, we need to bring that forward. Cost changes, inflationary impacts will, of course, affect everything. And then in terms of 2023 to 2026, we are getting managers to a place of this long-term budgeting, but there are still going to be things that maybe they didn't realize they needed to put in for 2026, or there will probably be some additions to the budget. But what we've asked staff to do is to truly prioritize those 4 years that are already in our current plan. And then, of course, for 2027, because it's brand new, those will all be highlighted for council and the community. One of the things we've also been talking to our staff about, and we're excited about in terms of our community and what we can provide, and you've just seen it with our recent presentation about the variance report, is really upping our accountability in terms of what are we budgeting for, what are we spending, what do we have the capacity to truly deliver on in terms of our workload capacity, external pressures. So we recognize that we often have positions in the budget, but truly what is the recruiting time lag for those, because it's really a competitive labor market right now. Considering those external challenges as well as our capacity. The reporting that continues to help us improve this is what you've just seen in terms of variance. And it's just the data that is new, relatively new to us in terms of being able to really see our capacity. So that's exciting. And then the last principle truly is, and this council is very familiar with it, but for the benefit of the community and perhaps members of the community that may be running in the next election, is that District of Squamish strategy, master plans, the key drivers that were shown on that slide drive and inform the 5-year financial plan and the budget. And so this year, again, we are aiming to, and you'll see the timeline in a moment, have the budget adopted in December. So for the next council, the real focus, the real effort once elected and the next council is here will be on that strategy and informing that strategy and then the subsequent budget. So that is staff's hope, is that that will be the process. And it will become more clear when I show the timeline here. So on the left is today. Something new that we're doing is bringing, you just jumped right in and started doing your slides.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead? I'm going to pass it over to Heather now.
Go for it. All right. So as Ms. Glenday started this slide, it's a snapshot of the proposed 2023 to 2027 financial plan timeline. With the first order of business today, so June 28th is our first meeting. The second order of business will be to bring forward the proposed capital plan on July 26th, and that's right before the council summer break. We will then reconvene with the utilities and the SLRD requisition after the long weekend on September 6th. Followed by the general operating budget, which includes the non-discretionary additional costs and service level change proposals on September 20th. Then on September 27th, staff will bring forward the special operating projects to council, and then council will also have the opportunity to revisit the capital projects as well. Staff are then proposing to make space in council schedule for the election, inauguration, and onboarding of new council, and will reconvene on November 15th with a review of all elements of the budget together before the financial plan is presented at the public information event on November 29th. Council will then be provided with the opportunity to review and make the changes as a result of the feedback provided at the public information event. Before the financial plan is brought forward on December 6th for 3 readings, and then again on December 13th, 3 readings on December 13th, and then adoption on December 20th. Just the next slide then, yeah. So just wanted to highlight some considerations when developing this timeline. So firstly, as Ms. Glenday highlighted, it is best practice. That's something that the district has adopted in the past and hoping to do so again for financial planning. Order of business in that strategic planning comes first and informs the financial plan. Therefore, the timeline supports that the new council would continue this pace, cadence, and goals of the prior council, which would be to adopt the budget in 2022 as largely developed by the previous council. The timeline provides space in October and November for the election, inauguration, and orientation of the new council. And finally, that the timeline and direction considers that staff are in the process of implementing a new budget software solution currently and concurrently with the budget timeline. Therefore, considering the resource constraints, we are not proposing any significant improvements to the budget process or deliverables in this coming year. Right, I will now hand it over to council for questions and feedback or discussion, just noting that there is no resolution required today. It's just for information purposes only.
Council, questions, feedback. Councillor Pettingill, followed by Councillor Stoner.
Thanks. Just 2 things. Can we have the screen that shows the timeline back up? Okay. Thank you. I'm just going to chew on that a little bit. And then my other question, pardon me, I vaguely recall that I had some concerns about the principles underlying our long-term financial plan. I couldn't remember exactly what they were. So I Googled it just now and I came up from the document I find is from November 1st, 2011. And the principles actually make sense to me when I read them now. So I'm not sure if I'm looking at an older one. I'm just wondering, and maybe this is for later, if that is the correct document. If it is, okay, I think I'm okay then. I was just going to ask to have the more recent one forwarded if there's a more recent one, but okay, thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. I don't think we actually did it last year, but I'm curious about, in previous years, we have done a community survey at the kickoff of budget to try and get community context on what we prioritize through the budget process. And I don't see that in the timeline. So I'm just wondering if somebody can speak to how we get the community's input before we do all the work and put it out to public input at the end of the day.
That's a great question. Thank you. The public information event that's there is just that one evening and doesn't mean to encapsulate all of the public engagement. I will have communications provide more detail on exactly what we're planning in terms of being able to engage the community on budget.
Okay, that would be helpful to have. And I think last year we didn't do the survey. Am I remembering that correctly? But I do think it might be a helpful process this time around just to get some weighting from the community as we talk about budget priorities. There might be some new ways to do that, but that's one piece in here that I'd really like to see some more context on. Thank you.
Further comments, questions, Council? Ms. Buckshard, you've referred to best practices. I wonder, of course, we are other municipalities looking at the same schedule, really, and the same circumstances. Has a comparison been made with the routines that being adopted by other local governments?
Thank you for the question through the chair. Not explicitly. So various communities have different adoption times, and we've looked at them in the past. Specifically, I'm not entirely sure what our neighboring communities are doing in terms of around the election, around inauguration, and around the onboarding, but we certainly can find out.
Thank you. Mayor Elliott?
It's generally understood that the prior council does most of the budgeting. And that was certainly my experience in my first term, is that even though we weren't adopting the budget till the new year, the work was substantially complete because the elections used to be later in November. And so the idea is that you hand your future council a primarily complete budget so that they can focus on onboarding and developing their strategic plan. And they're not worried about trying to make a million decisions about the community until they've had their full orientation and a year to work with their own strategic plan. So I know most of the Lower Mainland communities finish by the end of the year. I know Whistler does, so that it's really about strategic procurement and having 12 months to get your projects underway. So I don't think we would change that. I think it's just philosophically, most of us understand that we don't really get our full first budget until our first year in office.
Other comments, questions, Council? Councillor French?
Thanks, Chair. This conversation now has me going to a worst case scenario, quote unquote, worst case scenario. If we have a situation where 4 new members of council come in to these chairs with some very strong thoughts about budgeting, and those 4 or more reject this timeline, does that result in a staff panic button being pressed, or is there a bit of a plan B behind the scenes that might extend this planning out into the new year if need be?
Ms. Glenday.
Thank you. Staff never panic. Ultimately, you know, should the worst case scenario happen, staff will adapt and be very clear with the new council the consequences of that adaptation, which would be likely not finishing as many projects, behind in procurement. There would be consequences to that, and staff could handle it. Although it wouldn't be our first choice or first recommendation.
I, on the weekend, was approached by a member of a recreation group, and yesterday was approached by an individual with probably a common question around this time. It's the one we're discussing. I suppose with an election coming, that we delay until October before we make our suggestion towards a project or a budget or that type of input. And I suggested no, do it now. So I guess where I'm going is perhaps we should be ready to inform the public that this is our schedule, and that and for the reasons we've discussed, this is the one that makes sense and is the one that that other communities are adopting as well. We have moved our schedule forward, and we've done this over the last several years. But I do think that there may be questions coming forward from the community as to when they might time their input or suggestions regarding special projects or questions regarding special projects or capital projects. So we might be prepared for questions from the public and just be ready to inform them. But this is our schedule, and just suggestion. Any further questions or comments, Council? Mayor Elliott.
And just through the chair thinking ahead, and if we're going to solidify our 5-year planning a little bit more, right, so that we're not redoing the whole thing year to year, then I think we really do need to pay attention to, based on the next council's strategic plan, what engagement looks like leading up to that next budget cycle, because they'll want to hear more deeply from the community, as you know, they'll have their strategic plan out there about what that might look like in terms of the 5-year financial plan that they'll execute on over the course of their term. So I think just a bit more thought with our engagement and communications team about how that might look. So we're going to finish off our strategic plan with some of this budget, and obviously it's driven by our master plans. But yeah, if we're not going to change everything every year, then the community kind of needs to be okay with the direction the council's taking. So it's just something to think about for next year. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, I suggest we thank our presenters, Ms. Boxwood, Ms. Glenday. Thank you very much. And at this time, I will entertain a motion to close as per staff recommendation. Councillor Stoner and Councillor Herford seconds. Any opposed? Motion passed. Thank you. We'll go into closed session.